It's 3 minutes after 10. When do you think you became inured to it? When did you stop seeing homeless people? I mean, part of it is going to depend where you live, obviously. If you're visiting a big city from the sticks, you're probably going to note it a little bit more than those of us who live in big cities do. There were a couple of lads living in an underpass in Kidderminster about 2 years ago when I was visiting Mum. It's not an underpass I go through very often, so I don't know whether they're still there or not. But that jars more, for some reason, I don't know why, than it does when I see people sleeping rough in the city. And it's not that you stop noticing them, it's that you feel less over the years, as the years pass. When I moved to London in 1991, there is an incredibly leafy square on the fringes of Bloomsbury, down near Fleet Street, just behind the London School of Economics, in the heart of legal land, London's legal land. One of those parts of the country where if you squint a bit, the view would not have changed much since Dickens's time or beyond. Even the lampposts would probably have fitted in at the end of the 19th century. And when I moved to London in 1991, Lincoln's Inn Field was a shanty town. I hope that's a correct word to use. And I could not believe it. I mean, you know, I had been at boarding school, which I don't think anybody thinks of as preparing you for the mean streets of the big city. And then I'd spent, as I've told you many times, I'd spent the best part of a year pretending to be an actor in Manchester, living in a shared house and finally meeting people who hadn't come from a privately educated background. But I was utterly unprepared for what was on the doorstep of my top university, as the newspapers like to call them. And it was, I almost have to check myself, pinch myself retrospectively and think, are you sure that's what was there? Are you sure? Because, I mean, that is so at odds with the reality now that I sometimes think, are you exaggerating? Did you imagine it? Did you ever, were you having a fever dream? I wasn't. And by shantytown, what I mean is that they were semi-permanent structures. They were not just tents, although tents formed the backbone of the community, but they were also, you know, pallets had been turned into makeshift huts and bivouacs and anything you could lay your hands on, really, and things were strapped together and plastic sheeting was at a premium because it obviously provides waterproofing, and there was, I presume, a sort of semblance of some sort of social structure or some sort of hierarchy in place. But it was, in 1991, it was a shanty town in the middle of London. And, I mean, it's the one I knew best. It's the one that I would encounter on a kind of weekly basis, because obviously you wouldn't go there for fun. You wouldn't head there like you would now to eat your sandwich in the sunshine while you're sympathising with the queue outside the Sir John Soames Museum, who are being handed umbrellas at the moment to protect them from the sun, not the rain. It is now an absolutely beautiful corner of the capital, and was before. But for that window, and I couldn't even tell you how big that window was, but for that period of time in one of the richest cities in the universe, one of the finest places humankind has ever built or populated, there was an actual shanty town in the middle of London. And so that, for me, was almost certainly the beginning of the chipping away at the shock. And by shock, I mean what you see on the face of a child in cities for the first time when they encounter someone sleeping in a doorway or sitting at the bottom of a staircase on the London Underground with a cup in their hand and perhaps a dog at their side and a look of, well, I don't know, a look of desolation on their face. I don't know, whatever you would describe it as. And for the huge majority of our children, thank God, this is an incredibly jarring experience. I mention it because I saw it last week, and I heard a little girl turn to her mummy and say, "Why is that man homeless?" Carrying a little piece of cardboard that said, "I am homeless. Can you help me raise 28 quid for a hostel?" or some such. You're familiar with these little signs. Why does that, mummy? Why does that man not have a home? Why does that man not have a home? And that is peak shock, right? That's or confusion or whatever you prefer, concern even. Peak concern. And then over a period of years, that peak begins to fall for almost all of us. I salute the people for whom it doesn't. I salute you if you are as shocked and as disturbed today by homelessness as you were the very first time you encountered it. But for the rest of us, exposure diminishes surprise. Familiarity breeds, if not contempt, then a kind of comfort almost, or a quietness. Mummy, why is that man homeless? And it speaks volumes about a society, doesn't it? The more homelessness there is, the more inequality there is, probably. The less social care there is, the less support there is, the more addiction there is, the less help there is. Why is that man, Mummy, why is that man homeless? And I don't know why it's not fixed. I mean, if you can improve the situation so much, and then I think always of the temperature. At the time you feel the time the graph starts going back up again is usually, for me, related to the weather. I mean, when is the last time that you were absolutely freezing cold? I mean, freezing cold. Absolutely freezing cold, right? Okay, now try and go to sleep. Every night, feeling like that. And more recently, I imagine unbearably hot. Unbearably hot, and trying to get some peace or get some rest. But it's the freezing cold, isn't it? If you can do what obviously happened between 1991 and I don't know when, really. I don't know how long it lasted. I can't even, I'm afraid I can't even remember whether it was still there when I graduated. It disappears into the background of your life, doesn't it? What begins as shocking becomes commonplace the more that you encounter it. I can't remember. And if you can do that, if you can go from something that looks like a third world, a shanty town, to return it to being a grand, I think probably Georgian square, then why can't you go the whole hog? What Angela Rayner, I nearly called her Angela Burnham then, that'd start the gossips, wouldn't it? What Angela Rayner just said during the news there was really interesting. How incredible it is to hear someone talk about drawing upon their experiences as a care worker to come to a better understanding of homelessness. I mean, it'll never catch on. What you really need to do to have a proper understanding of homelessness is attend public school, go to a top university, and then get hired by the Daily Telegraph to write about how they're all work-shy spongers who are laughing at the rest of us. But if you actually care about reality or reasons, then who better to listen to when you're talking about a subject like this than somebody charged with actually looking after the people who have fallen through the cracks? And to hear her say, it won't be overnight. You can't persuade everybody to move back indoors, even if you provide them with a bed. I've spoken to people over the years who've made it clear to me they'd rather not be in a hostel because they feel less safe there. And if they're dealing with addiction problems, sometimes they're more likely to be exposed to substance abuse that might tempt them back onto a path they've worked very hard to get off. I think the worst story I ever heard was a lad who, not the worst story I ever heard, but the one that got me the most. I used to stop and chat to a lad who was selling the Big Issue outside the Opera House in Covent Garden, and I got to know him quite well, actually, to the point where we sort of swapped phone numbers and would message each other a little bit, and I helped as much as I could, and he got on a training course to become a barista, and we kind of lost touch. Aaron, if you're listening, then I hope things have worked out really well for you. But one day he was gentle and upbeat, and he made me realise something about ruthlessness. So I fear homelessness. I fear homeless people. I see homeless people. I see chaos. Right. And you get to know someone, and it's not easy. I'm not suggesting everybody bends down and starts having a chat, although I think Big Issue salesmen and women are perhaps an entry-level connection to this world. And he taught me something about ruthlessness. He was a gentle man. And you think of homeless people as being feral or ruthless or I don't know, frightening. You're much more likely to end up homeless, I think, if you are vulnerable and gentle and not capable of fighting back, for example. He'd had a terrible relationship with a stepfather to whom his mother would not stand up. He came to London looking for work, had enough money to stay in a sort of ropey B&B for a while, didn't find work, and came up against that wall where he had nowhere to sleep that night. So he started sleeping in a subway down by Tower Bridge. I sort of offered to put him in a hostel, and he said, I don't really want to go in a hostel. It's a bit scary. So I'm better off in that subway. And then one morning he was really downbeat. He was never downbeat, and he was really downbeat. And I asked him what was wrong, and someone had just stopped on their way home and emptied a can of lager over his head while he was fast asleep in his sleeping bag in the subway down near Tower Bridge. And I just, for me, if that happened to me, it'd be awful, right? But I'd go home, I'd stick everything in the washing machine, I'd have a kip, I'd have some breakfast, I'd get up, I'd be bouncing back. You'd never know if you saw me the next morning that someone had emptied a tin of lager over my head at midnight last night. For him, that's it. I mean, that's the whole day out there. Still a bit sticky, still smelly, got to get to facilities, got to get it washed, costs a lot of money. Unless you're lucky, you're getting the right support. Do you see what I mean? It's just a constant. I think a bit about Vimes's boots. You know, that line in Terry Pratchett about the fella who could only afford cheap boots, and he'd wear them till they fell apart, and then he'd replace them with another pair of cheap boots. But if you could afford expensive boots, you spent less money on boots over the course of your lifetime. It's like a premium on being poor. This isn't exclusive to the homeless. If you're getting your energy on a card, for example, you're probably paying more for your energy than people who've got it on direct debit. I think you are. You certainly used to be. But that simple experience, if you want to make food, if you want to eat a sandwich and you haven't got a home, you have to buy a sandwich. If you want to buy a loaf of bread and a hunk of cheese, what are you going to do with it? Keep it in your rucksack? Good luck with that. So you're buying a sandwich rather than a loaf of bread and a hunk of cheese. There's a premium. There's a tax on being poor, let alone on being homeless. A tax on being homeless. And I don't know why it hasn't been a higher political priority. And I want you to tell me. I want you also to tell me, if you can, not so much how people end up on the streets or how you ended up on the street, because I think we've done that a lot in the past. And I wonder this morning whether it's actually the right question, with Andy Burnham unveiling his rough sleeping plan, which has already been enacted to some success in Manchester. Of course, if you're the editor of The Spectator, I got a quick suggestion. Why don't you send someone to Manchester, find someone in a sleeping bag, and then use that to prove that Andy Burnham hasn't improved homelessness in Manchester at all. There's one homeless person proves that the scheme hasn't worked. Of course it doesn't, but it will not, as Angela Rayner has explained this morning, be possible to persuade everybody indoors overnight for a variety of reasons. £442 million, that's a delightfully specific figure, isn't it? £442 million being set aside for a national drive to get everyone in for Christmas. So first thing to bear in mind is, everyone doesn't mean everyone. It just means taking such an enormous bite out of this problem that what is left will be not negligible, but tiny. And rather than asking you what made you, although of course if that's the part of your story you would rather share because you think that will be of more use and more interest to everybody else listening, then you know what the number is. Why did you stay homeless? I imagine, and please correct me if I'm wrong on all of this stuff, I imagine that on your first night homeless, you think it might be your last night homeless, right? And then 5 years later, 1 year later, 6 months later, you're still there. Why do people stay homeless? And I'm not really looking at the people who become almost institutionalized by it and don't know quite how to return to normal life. You hear that about prison as well, which again is a place that ordinary people would dread to be. But some people on release don't know what to do with themselves and feel safer back inside. They're not the people that drive the policy on stuff like this. Why did you stay homeless? 0345 60 60973 is the number that you need. I can't wait to hear your answers to this. One thing on the politics of it, and I hope this doesn't sound cynical, I think it's pure left-wing politics, this. I really do. I think the idea that there are people in society worse off than you and you have some sort of responsibility to lift them up is, well, I would once have called it Christian charity, but I think that's offensive to people from other religions and indeed atheists and agnostics. But it is, for me, what the Labour movement exists to do, to recognise that everybody is capable of contributing to society, but some of us need more help than others to do so, and the people that are truly not capable of contributing to society really need looking after. The challenge really is to tell the difference and provide the help that's needed. It's not Sparta, it's the United Kingdom, this. But the political answer, obviously, is that there's no votes in the actual homeless. And there's no votes in promising to end homelessness, I don't think, not really, because anyone can do that. I think, politically speaking, and I don't think this is why Andy Burnham's doing it, I think if you remove homelessness to such a great degree that people notice it's gone down by loads, you create something really special. I don't know how long it lasts, but if you are comparing the past to the present and the answer to what's changed is politics, it actually creates a real political win. So it makes it even harder to understand why it hasn't been fixed before. The obvious answer is because it's really hard, or because nobody understands why people stay homeless, which is why you're about to tell me. 0345 6060 973. It's 20 past 10.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10 is the time. I've always thought you can tell something about a country by what it learns to walk past. And somewhere along the way, we've got used to seeing people sleeping rough on our street. This is Andy Burnham writing in a newspaper today. I think he means it, and I think I would too if I was a politician. But an awful lot of politicians who also meant it have not managed to achieve it. Why is it so hard to fix homelessness? Thomas is in Southampton. Thomas, what would you like to say?
Hiya. I'm quite personally attached to this subject, so I'll keep it brief.
You don't have to. You don't have to, mate. I never do.
I appreciate that. I'm 30 years old now. Recently, a couple of years ago, finally got myself on my feet after 8 years of sofa surfing and being displaced. And in the past year, I've begun working at a hostel for the homeless. So we have 65 residents, permanent residents. They come either because they're found on the street with pneumonia, come from prison, and they're there until they basically pay a couple months' rent to the Two Saints charity, then they get to move on.
Right.
So I've had both sides of it. Luckily for me, I don't suffer mental health issues or anything. I've got my bearings about me. I was able to get out of that situation, but I found there was such an intense lack of support, and it just felt that, you know, the essentials, the amenities you need to survive that would end your destitution, being, you know, a roof over your head, covering the bills. When you're coming from a position, however you end up there, from having no money in your bank account and no work, seeing that task in front of you, it's almost like, you know, trying to surmount a vertical wall. And
it's a lot easier to fall down that hole than it is to climb out of it.
Precisely, yeah. And obviously, if you have fallen down, you've also then got the mental trauma of what's just happened to you, the task ahead of you. And I've noticed, obviously, that there will be, unfortunately, people that require constant support, you know, due to physical or mental health. But for the people that could pull themselves up a bit, from my 8 years experience and from working at this hostel where you do have residents that are just sort of, they seem like they're sort of in a liminal space in between lives.
Do people give up? I presume people give up. I presume, and I know it's a bit glib, but most people presume that their first night, particularly on the streets, will be their last, or that it certainly isn't going to become a permanent state of affairs. And then they contemplate the scale of the challenge in front of them, as you've just described. Ooh. And they sort of think, as most of us might, well, what's the point in even trying? I'm never going to make any progress.
That's precisely it. I found in my experience it became, you know, I was young. I was only 19 years old, so I still had that sort of naive optimism around the world. I was very cocksure of myself, very confident. And I felt that being whittled away. I went to about 27 years old, so I was able to say I've got my own little studio room now for a variety of reasons. But I just found during that time, you know, like at 22, 23, I did have that in my head. Like, it hasn't happened yet, but you've still got to keep rolling the dice. Yeah. Eventually you'll get a fix. By 26, 27 years old, it was only through, you know, chance, someone explaining, you do this, you might get somewhere through spare room. But at that point, I was becoming disenfranchised. You know, I got very high grades at school. I was projected to do quite well. Unfortunately, I had a bereavement at 19, so I was made homeless through that. And then when
Can I pause you there? Do you mind?
Sorry?
So can I just pause you there for people who wonder how that works? So was it was social housing that was your family member that you lost? It was their home, and when they passed away, you no longer had any entitlement to stay in it.
That's absolutely right. Yeah,
Right.
I lived in a council house my whole life till 19. Dad died suddenly of a heart attack. Went to the shops one day, didn't come back.
Oh, mate.
And then council evicted me. They weren't even going to provide me with a place. They were going to move me onto the street, and it was only because I was assigned a caseworker who, out of his own pocket, he paid for me to go to a YMCA. And that's kind of the point I'm getting at. Sometimes it feels people slip through the brutality of rules and regulations, regardless of the human cost. And when you are the human that is that cost, you begin to think, is this society providing for me, or am I just sort of collateral so everybody else can drive nice cars? And you don't want to think like that, but obviously chronically being held down it sometimes feels. You're turning to the DWP, you're turning to these people that are supposed to help you, and all they say is, well, you know what you got to do? Find a full-time job, and you don't even have a bed to go back to after your shift. And you just think, well, is it really me, or is this the misfortune of birth? And then you begin to think, well, that's surely what we should be. I mean, personally, I think, we have a role as a society to help each other, and I think economically that would make sense too.
And that is what the new government has announced a proper intention to do. Why do you think, and you've got an interesting period of time to draw on here, actually, of your time at homeless, and then the 9 months or so now that you've spent working with homeless people, why do you think it hasn't been fixed? So almost looking at it through the other end of the telescope.
Personally, I think during the Tory government, we had a set of individuals running this country whose main priority was growth, whether that came at the cost of, everybody on the lower income scale. If your property prices are going up, then obviously you've got growth. I think the short-term cost, there will be a short-term economic hit to having to put the investment in to get infrastructure and services available to help those that need it. But there will be a short-term cost, and obviously the Tories are the last kind of people to say to people, let's all, help out people that need it a bit more than us.
I mean, we have homelessness under Labour, but we're talking about economies of scale here, aren't we? We're talking about the difference between it being a priority and it not being a priority. In a sense, I suppose, if we're going to be, and how can you not be political about this, that if you end up on the streets, it's somehow your own fault.
Yeah, that's...
In which case, why should my tax money be used on helping you?
Yeah, I think it comes, if you're a younger person, there's always the misfortune of birth. In my case, obviously, a bereavement, I was made homeless, and then... That's a
horrible story, mate. I don't want to gloss over that. That's because, that was horribly unfair what happened to you, and to be hit when you were down and to be hurt when you'd just gone through what you'd gone through, is a lot of people listening are going to be reeling at the discovery that goes on in the country that they live in, and the treasury to which they pay tax can create a scenario like yours. It's wonderful that you're bouncing back now and fighting. Not fighting, that you're living the life you deserve. But and forgive me if this is mawkish. Tell me about the first night in your new home. Tell me what that was like.
As in, once I acquired somewhere.
Yeah.
It was a mix. It felt like the book had sort of been shut. That's initially how it felt. Finally, it's time for the new chapter. Put that behind me. But that was about 2 years ago, and honestly, it's only about the past 7 months I've begun to feel fully psychologically detached from that period in my life, where I view myself as a working individual with a steady income and a steady home. I think the inertia from that experience certainly left, stress, which didn't rationally make sense once I found somewhere to live. But I think, the chronic... Well, you're
hypervigilant, I imagine, and you think it could all... It fell apart so quickly and so completely before, it could all fall apart quickly and completely again.
Absolutely, yes. That's 100% it. And as you said earlier, when people make that fall and then they're stuck at the sheer face of the wall again, sometimes that contributes to their sort of stasis. That's just happened to you, and it's a natural psychological defence to sort of avoid situations you assign danger to.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's all these nuances and stuff, and obviously it does come down to, do you have 500 quid to move in, mate? Yes or no? But, ultimately, just say that it's just everybody's fault. I work with these people, and plenty of them, they've been tradesmen in the past, they've been roofers, and you ask, well, why don't you get back into that?
Yeah.
And there is this sort of you know, as I said, there will be people that need support, but for those that could get themselves out of it, I think maybe a bit more support, a bit of a
ladder. I mean, to labour that analogy to Breaking Point, Thomas, just if you're stuck down a hole and you're falling into it, you need a ladder to get out.
Exactly.
And
You need to lower the ladder to these people instead of just holding it up there being, you shouldn't have fallen in that hole then.
Well, I think you're a ladder. I think you're I think you're a top bloke, and to go through what you go through and then end experience determined to help other people get through the same thing more easily or less traumatically is a wonderful thing. Thank you. It is 10:30 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's Dominic Ellis with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:34. Day 2 of me trying not to be distracted by my inbox while I'm actually talking to you, because Keith detected yesterday when we had technical difficulties that closed down my inbox that it actually improved my concentration levels and indeed my what Keith, who's quite a fashionable young man, he described as my flow. It's my flow, which I think may be a hip-hop term. But it's day 2 of that, which means I check them more during the breaks now than I will while we're on air. And I can tell you, I've received a complaint from Catherine in Northumberland that is, given the normal contents of my inbox, it is almost unbelievable. I wonder if anybody can get, what is the most unlikely complaint? Or at least in terms of contradicting all the other complaints that I get. What would be the thing that Catherine could say that would make you go, flipping heck, I never thought that day would dawn? Because that is the complaint from Catherine today. I never thought that day would dawn. And I will not only share that with you shortly, but I will also directly address the complaint that Catherine makes. Sean's been in touch to say, hi, James. I was a legal clerk back in 1991, and I was often back and forth through Lincoln's Inn Fields. The most memorable and jarring thing for me was how commonplace the shanty town became. Far from being off limits, the lunchtime netball league games still happened. Barristers still sat on benches. People did still visit the John Soanes Museum. And yes, LSE students like you would still wander past. It's amazing what can become normalised, isn't it, as we've seen again and again. And that was just simply the point I was making about a child's reaction to a homeless person when they visit a big city for the first time and ask their mummy why that man has no home. Usually a man, not always. And the adult, the inured urbanite, the city dweller, who doesn't not notice anymore, but certainly doesn't react in the way that they did the very first time they encountered it. Andrew's in Stockton-on-Tees. Andrew, what would you like to say?
James, I think this project by the government will define all government projects going forward for the next 40 years, if it succeeds. The only reason it will succeed, however, is not because of capital, not because of finance. It is because of government departments giving up some control. We did this in the south of England and took the homeless count down to 0 practically.
Who's we?
I worked on the Rough Sleeper Committee in Berkshire, and the key to it was having all the elements of homelessness, because people think homelessness is a council issue.
Sure. Yeah.
It isn't. It's an NHS issue. It's a police issue. It's a DWP issue. The one department responsible for more homelessness than anything is the Department of Work and Pensions.
Yeah.
Because they sanction people for this is people who are addicted, have mental health issues, all sorts of things. They sanction people, and you end up with the madness of someone practically having TB, calling an ambulance because they can't breathe, being given a prescription for some antibiotics, and not being able to get the prescription because they've been sanctioned. And if you turn over a prescription script, unless you're in receipt of universal credit, you can't get the things free. So they then
I'm not making light of it, but Franz Kafka would have written that, wouldn't he?
Yeah, but they then end up with worse TB, and ambulance get called again. They then end up in hospital, and then the pièce de resistance. The hospital is 25 miles away from where their tent is, or something like this, and the hospital then puts them out on the street where the hospital is.
And they're supposed to get back to their tent. I'm not going to say get back home.
The other thing as well that honestly was key to this with us was the police. The police were fabulous, because if you read the essay $1 Million Murray, 2 American cops worked out that the homeless guy over the years before he died had cost the police and justice $1 million. and they could have housed him for $250,000.
Yeah.
But you can't just house people. If you house people, it won't work. You have to have this wraparound service. I worked with people who had alcohol addiction. We couldn't get them into a rehab. They died.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't a place in the rehab. And yet, if it was any other illness,
they'd have found a place.
They'd have been at the top of the queue for appendicitis, cancer. But
what?
They're also not a category, by the way, in the NHS. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me, given not just what you've said, but what the evidence of my own eyes and ears tells me. What period were you involved in this programme?
It was 2017 to just before COVID. Well, it was during COVID, actually, because everyone in worked. But giving
and who drove it? What was the impetus behind? I'm going to have to take your word for the figures, and I'm happy to.
You can look them up.
I'm happy to. But what drove it? Why did Berkshire suddenly decide that this was an issue that it was going to prioritise and also deal with? It's a dreadful word, Andrew, but holistically is what you're describing.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very, very posh place to live, and all of a sudden there was homeless people polluting the streets, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
And some fabulous charity folk got together, some churches and everything else, said this is just not good enough. How are we in the second or third richest county in Britain with,
and so someone took the time to look at it properly and to come up with this multi-agency or holistic approach.
Absolutely.
Or whatever.
It was a combination of, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but Health Watch, which is a wonderful organisation, was just saying, why are we failing this group of patients when we try so hard for a different group of patients? Their death rate, they weren't getting... And actually, the COVID vaccination thing actually helped more attention because they had to be vaccinated because they were more vulnerable. It's a bit like vulnerable veterans. There are services for them now that didn't used to be, but it only works if all the system is joined up. And the fact that the NHS refuses to categorise them as a vulnerable group, the minute that happens, they get access to... But
it's chicken and egg, right?
Jabs
yeah. This is the point that you just prompted in my mind. I'm sorry for interrupting you. So it becomes chicken and egg. They're categorised as a vulnerable group because there's not a great deal the NHS can do with that categorisation. But if there is a system to which you get referred when you are homeless, then it becomes a heck of a lot easier for the NHS to categorise you as homeless because that puts you on a pathway that currently doesn't exist.
Yes, you would get an annual health check. You would get a flu jab. So all the things that you are more vulnerable for would be taken care of. Dentistry, people pulling their own teeth out, and all those services that just make your life miserable.
They're all ladders, right? I'm being simplistic talking to Thomas, but they're all ladders. Or they're all rung. There we go. I love my analogies. I apologise if people find them a bit mawkish, but you're talking about rungs now. So Thomas talked about a ladder, and Andrew has described the rungs. You need lots of different rungs on a ladder to make a ladder effective. It's easy to fall down a hole. It's not easy to climb out of one. You need a ladder. What's the ladder made of? The ladder's made of rungs. And there is no sole responsibility for the ladder. There are myriad rungs. There's the police, there's the health service, there's the council, there's the charities, there's all the different areas, all pulling together to help get this person out of the hole. Andrew, thank you. I'm moving on only just to get as many voices as possible on this hour because I think it's helpful. Toyin is in Chiswick. Toyin, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so, morning, James.
Hello.
I'm a bit nervous.
It's only me.
I'm a bit nervous.
It's only me.
So, James,
Yes.
I've worked in homelessness for several years.
Yeah.
I'm not working in it anymore, but I have worked in it for several years. Now, I would use the example of the pandemic. All the outreach teams were working throughout the pandemic, and for the first time, I'll say for London, because I covered London, the government offered accommodation to every single rough sleeper. So the numbers of rough sleeping did come down at the time.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, what is important to maintain a low level of rough sleeping is you have tenancy sustainment teams.
Right.
So you do have teams that will help the rough sleepers that have now come into accommodation to sustain their tenancies. And it could be through understanding, like, the economics of their monies.
Yeah.
It could be through a variety of different types of support systems. But I did actually see the numbers really fall dramatically during the pandemic.
So when the political will is there, the possibility is proved. It is possible to do. And then when the political will is not there, because it costs money and other reasons, then the problem starts growing back again.
Absolutely, because in Finland, they have a model called Housing First. Now, the UK adopted the Housing First model, and again, it has worked through. But the thing is that with the UK Housing First model, it was really more modelled for homeless men.
Yeah.
So you do have mixed gender Housing First models in the UK, but the single gender ones for women, they have better outcomes because there's no trauma. The women feel safer, so they will work better with their caseworkers.
Of course. I mean, there is a consensus emerging on the phones this morning, and everyone except me in this conversation really knows what they're talking about, and it is that sense of everyone, which is why the words of Andy Burnham, I think, will encourage you, Toyin, and certainly Andrew and Thomas as well. I also know, he wrote this morning, that from my time in Manchester, that public money alone won't solve this. Ending rough sleeping has to be something we all take responsibility for. That means councils, charities, businesses, faith groups and local communities all pulling together. And even more importantly, it means all of us asking what we can do to help, which is obviously not an invitation or a request that is going to be made by everybody. But it does speak to what we have been hearing all morning about the best way to solve this. And yet none of this really, I don't know whether it does for you, Toyin, it chips away at the sense of wonder, the sense of incredulity you have when you think about the economic status of this country and the lives of luxury that many of us lead, or even modest luxury in terms of comparisons with 50 or 100 years ago. And the fact that people can still sleep on streets. People who don't want to can still slip through cracks and stay slipped for, in some cases, the rest of their lives. I don't only think that he should do this. I increasingly, as this conversation continues, I think that he could. And I'm not desperately far away from thinking that he probably will. And then what happens politically? Because I actually disagree. And I don't think you're being particularly cynical when you text me to say there's no votes in it. I disagree. I listen, here's what you do, right? You walk down your high street. It's currently got 4 homeless people on it. 5 maybe. And you know that there's a couple who will be round the corner in the Marks and Spencer's car park or the Morrison's multi-storey and until they get moved on. And you know it's there. It's background noise in your life. And then it's not there. And you're walking down the same high street and you're parking in the same car park and it's not there. The background noise has gone. And when you clock that the background noise has gone, your brain will ask you a question. Why has it gone? And the answer to that question will be politician or politics. It will be also, of course, all of the people that have actually affected the change, the charities, the businesses, the faith groups, the local communities, the councils, us. But actually what has changed will be the political will. So when your brain asks that question, why have things got better? And the answer is Andy Burnham or Angela Rayner or Labour or government or politics, then I think there are actually votes in it, which is not, I don't think, why they're doing it, but it's why I would at the moment describe success as win-win, win-win-win.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10 to 11 and it's time for Catherine's complaint. If you're just tuning, I sounded a bit like Terry Wogan then. If you're just tuning in, Catherine issued a complaint to the programme half an hour ago, and I suggested that none of us ever thought the day would dawn that someone would complain about me doing what Catherine complains about me doing. I'm going to read out 3 suggested answers to you, because an awful lot of people made exactly the same suggestions, but it is Ron, Ray and Frank who have risen to the top of the pile. Ron suggests, is Catherine complaining, James, that your monologues are too short? No. Ray asks, is Catherine complaining about you not talking enough, James? No. And Frank says, was Catherine complaining that you were letting someone speak for too long before you interrupted them? No. Frank, it's not that either. I think possibly it's an even more unlikely complaint than the ones that you have submitted. Here it is. This is from Catherine in Northumberland. Why isn't James O'Brien talking about Farage and reform? Has there been an injunction? Because normally James O'Brien would have done a whole show on the reform PIP changes and the infighting with top members and the suspension of Tim Montgomery. He would normally relish these topics. It seems like he'll talk about anything but Farage and reform. And then a kiss and a smiley emoji to show that this is meant warmly and with love. But nonetheless, it's only Wednesday. How do you know what I'm doing now? I mean, the part of the reason I don't like talking about the policies, I'll tell you, Catherine, is because they're not policies. They are populist maypoles around which credulous people are being invited to dance. So whether it is their migration policies that fall apart before they've actually sat down and finished announcing them because all of the people that they would need to cooperate have said no, or whether it is their welfare policies announced this week without anybody pointing out, for example, if you're going to make all the unemployed people sweep the streets, then won't you be making all the people who sweep the streets unemployed? Riddle me that, Richard Tice. But if you treat them, if I do phone-in topics on these policies, then they might begin to look to some people listening like actual policies rather than populist maypoles around which credulous people are being invited to dance. So that's part of the answer to your question, Catherine. On the infighting, it's a proper little conundrum, this. I want to talk about some of the gambling stuff that is being added to the list of financial questions they really, really need to answer. And we probably should have gone in harder on the apparent lies about the police warning him to stay away from his own by-election victory announcement, which the police have made absolutely clear never happened. But the stuff about the infighting, the pomposity of this chap, Tim Montgomery, who is, I think, just a former journalist. I can't remember whether he did anything else before that. And I think we go back to the era when if you couldn't get a job on a paper, you'd set up a website. I think that's what he did. My apologies to him and to anyone who cares if I'm misremembering. And then he had a little stint on the Times, and I mean little. But didn't curry favour or produce the goods or cut the mustard or enjoy himself there. I don't know which of those choices would best. But the idea that this man's ludicrous shilly-shallying from one right-wing organisation to another is somehow national news, or the idea, Catherine, that anybody's going to be surprised that Nigel Farage can't organise a knees up in a brewery. I don't know. I just worry sometimes that if I draw attention to stuff that would matter if it was happening in a different political party, then people might forget that this is not a proper political party. It's a vanity project. It's an ego trip. It's a grift. It's whatever you want to call an organisation that welcomes 30p Lee Anderson into its fold as some sort of intellectual or political titan. So, yeah, there are bits I will talk about, but I don't really see the point in insulting my listeners by asking them if they have substantive, cogent opinions about policies that are neither substantive nor cogent. It would be a bit like me asking you, Nigel Farage has announced his intention to nail jelly to a wall. Do you think this will work? And do you welcome this intervention? I hope that answers your question, Catherine. But anyway, that is a complaint I never thought I'd see. Now I've seen it. 10:54 is the time. Norman's in Coleshill. Norman, what made you pick up the phone?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
First
Norman.
time caller.
Welcome.
Love the show.
Why does it taking you so long, Norman?
Because I have just heard you on the radio, pulled over, and I thought I've got to phone you.
Good man.
Because I have a very, not a very well thought out solution, but I think
they're my favourite kind.
I think I've been working with rough sleepers for 20 years in Birmingham city centre, and then helping them to sustain a tenancy. Yeah. 99% of the time, the person would end up back on the street after they'd had got them into accommodation.
Right.
Because the top-up fee for the rent, even if it was £4 a week, drugs,
any money that went to them directly would go directly to their dealer.
Yeah. So inevitably, then they would end up in debt, and then they would lose their tenancy.
Yeah.
So my very rustic solution would be you get accommodation, and then the amount of manpower and resources that are, to keep someone in a tenancy, and the money that is spent So I would get accommodation, like a hostel, and the person would have their benefits. They would deductions would be taken out of their benefits, and then the money that was left, you'd say, there you go, you spend it, that's yours.
The reasoning behind it was autonomy, wasn't it, to give people agency and more control over their destiny. But I don't think it would be too controversial to suggest that if you're in the process of emerging from a period of homelessness, then it is perfectly reasonable for the state to retain agency over your financial arrangements, or many of your financial arrangements, up to and including keeping a roof over your head. Because you give people a choice, but you give an addict a choice between paying some rent or buying some drugs. They're going to buy some drugs.
But this is also controversial. The feedback that we had from the people that we worked with, because we went out 3 o'clock in the morning, tea, coffee, clothing, was that they said to us, when we got to know them and they trusted us, you are keeping us in our homelessness. Because I'm being fed, I've been clothed, and all I need to get now is beg for the money for my drugs. Yeah. So I'm quite happy.
And not just drugs, of course. I think that sometimes creates quite a phantom image in people's brains. It could just be alcohol, something that most people are a lot more familiar with. And you describe the desperation of addiction. And you describe the fact that addiction is more important than anything else. You need food to stay alive. You do not need a house to stay alive. And if it's a choice between paying for a house and paying for drugs, you're going to pay for drugs, which is another reason why it needs to be a multi-agency approach. I mean, I hope you didn't take that too much to heart, Norman. I think the value and the importance of the work that you did is immeasurable, but it is the logic of the perverse logic of the addict that you're describing. Or if you want to get pretentious about it, and I usually do, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which addiction doesn't really fit into, does it? It kind of makes a mockery of Maslow's hierarchy of needs because it trumps almost everything except basic sustenance. And if a charity is providing basic sustenance, that frees up pennies that can instead be spent on the addiction. I still think Burnham might pull it off. Norman, take care, mate. I look forward to your second call to the programme, and drive carefully. Chris is in Irvine in Scotland. Chris, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I was homeless in 2005 in Scotland, and thankfully I've managed to keep my house and stuff like that. So I'm lucky that way. And I just wish there was more things for the homeless people out there that are actually in the streets and stuff like that are living in like mobile tents set up by charities, because it's not really fair.
It's a holding pen, that, isn't it? It's a holding tactic. It's not a solution or an alleviation of a problem. It's just a sort of containment, literally a containment. What helped you? How did you get out of, or how did you get off the streets and get into a home?
Well, I just went to the local council and basically just told them I had nowhere to stay. Cause
were you very young?
At 16,
right.
my parent had moved to a different bit of Scotland, and I decided I wanted to stay where my friends were, and that. So basically, that's what I done.
Just a strong-willed 16-year-old.
There's lots of support, like the hostel that I get put in. They kind of looked after the under 21s. It was for everybody where I stayed was under 21.
Yeah.
So they kind of they didn't put you into a house until they knew you could look after your room and tidy up and that. So they only gave people houses that could actually look after them, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. The proposals Burnham's talking about are for England, not for Scotland. I probably should have made that clearer. Quite a lot of the stuff we're talking about at the moment is in need of a little bit of clarification. And there have been times when Scotland seems to have led the way on some areas of social policy, addiction being one of them, and then there are times where Scotland seems to lag behind other parts of the United Kingdom, which is true of every single part of the United Kingdom sometimes, except possibly Northern Ireland. I don't mean anything bad by that. I just can't think off the top of my head of many areas in which economically or socially Northern Ireland shows the way for the rest of the United Kingdom. Do please educate me if you think that there are areas, but yeah, I mean, the idea of a holistic approach might be new to England. It doesn't necessarily mean it's new to everywhere else in the UK. It's now 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't know if you were listening yesterday, and I sometimes worry that when people in this line of work talk about the silly season, you quite understandably, if you're not in or adjacent to journalism, you point out there's lots of stories around. What are you talking about? But the point really is that Parliament is in recess. And Parliament drives so much of the conversation that we have together that when they're in recess, things feel rather different. It's not as true as it used to be because the madness of British politics over the course of the last 10 years has transcended traditional holiday periods. But it is called the silly season for a reason, and it is why we find ourselves contemplating conversations that we perhaps wouldn't ordinarily have. For example, if you missed yesterday's show, we spent the last hour of the programme asking if you'd ever been attacked by a wild animal. It had a news peg, a little bit of inside lingo for you there. It had a peg. The peg was a bloke in a park in Richmond, London, not Yorkshire, getting attacked by a stag. Happily, no life-changing or life-threatening injuries, and unhappily, the stag was shot. That is the price you pay as a stag for attacking a human. And it was you enjoyed it. Don't pretend you didn't, unless, of course, you missed it, in which case you couldn't have enjoyed it. But we peaked. Well, we kind of peaked with a lion attacking a man, attacking a tent that a man was in. We peaked with a lion, full stop. Then there was a late challenge from a monkey that was being kept, probably illegally, by a taxidermist in East London. So do you see what I mean? The headline question, have you ever been attacked by a wild animal, may not necessarily provide you with a great indication of the conversation that is likely to follow. And I think I'm going to do another one today. I'm going to give you a clue. It is a story. It has a news peg. The news peg is Labour's new farming minister. All right? He is the news peg for a silly season question that I might ask you from 12 noon today. And I'll give you a little bit more of an update later in the hour so that you can prepare your contribution. And speaking of later today, Mikey Smith of the Daily Mirror will be talking to us about Donald Trump's legal action against the BBC, because something quite weird occurred to me. If you're on Donald Trump's side and you are in the British media, you're not going to be reporting this properly, right? I mean, I think it was a Daily Telegraph who effectively gave Donald Trump the evidence that he thought he could use to sue the BBC. And of course, right-wing media piled in against the BBC and on the side of, well, I don't need to list Donald Trump's personal depravity again, but they're all perfectly comfortable with it. They don't care at all about any of that, right up to and including launching a ludicrous war and helping him pretend that it was a good idea. So if you're on Donald Trump's side in a legal action against the BBC, you're not going to report what's going on in that legal action properly. You're going to once again let down your listeners, betray your viewers, and mislead your readers. So we're going to get Mikey Smith of the Daily Mirror, who's been following events quite closely. Simon Marks is busy. That's otherwise we'd get Simon to do it, of course, to talk us through that a little bit later in the programme as well. So expect Mikey Smith to be with us at about 12:30. Now, speaking about things that the right-wing media is not going to tell you, let me read you some headlines from just 2 or 3 short years ago. Cairns deputy urged scientists to alter study showing emissions scheme had no impact on child health. ULEZ expansion has gone ahead in defiance of evidence. That was the Spectator. The first one was the Telegraph. Sadiq Khan's 8-year war on motorists is terrifying communities. That was GBB's. Labour's war on motorists, the tip of the iceberg. That was the Telegraph. Low emission zones rake in more money from fines than daily charges. That was the Telegraph. ULEZ, Sadiq Khan slammed for taking cash from poorest. That was GBB's. Sadiq Khan claim of 4,000 deaths a year due to pollution deemed, quotes, misleading, end quotes. That's GBB's calling other people misleading. Could ULEZ lead to Sadiq Khan's downfall? That's the Spectator. ULEZ could mark the end of the road for Sadiq Khan. That's also the Spectator. Sadiq Khan's ULEZ has spectacularly backfired. That's also the Spectator. LSE verging on irresponsible for claiming low emission zones improve school grades. That's the Telegraph. What have they all got in common? Here's a story that they're not going to be covering with quite the same attention, if at all. Scientists stunned by children's lung recovery in ultra-low emission zone. This is the word that they use, is literally stunned by how quickly young children's lungs began to recover and grow after pollution restrictions were brought in. Now, I sometimes think when we're talking about stuff, I do ask myself sometimes, should we leave the politics at the door? Should we leave my lifelong critique of the corruption of people's understanding that the right-wing media exists to provide? And I sometimes think, yeah, leave it out today, James. It's not the most important element of the story. But today it categorically is. That's absolutely extraordinary, right? You remember what it was like, don't you? You remember the bilge coming out of your radio and coming out of your television screen and appearing on the newspapers in front of you or your mum. ULEZ was the end of civilization as we know it. ULEZ was some sort of apocalyptic threat to our freedoms. Ian Duncan Donuts was publicly defending criminals. That's a sort of senior Conservative politician publicly defending criminals. It's extraordinary. A lot of people in my constituency have been cementing up the cameras or putting plastic bags over them, he said. I am happy for them to do it because they are facing an imposition that no one wants and they have been lied to about it. The actions you are seeing show how angry people are at what is being imposed on them. Sadiq Khan has gerrymandered all the information. People have had enough. Ian Duncan Donuts there, who I think in this week of all weeks, it is important to remember, had a farrago, that's the word I was looking for, of fictions on his own CV, which didn't prevent him from carrying on as being leader of the Conservative Party. But there he is, endorsing criminality, vandalism, violence. And of course, some of the people who got very upset about ULEZ were veering into the realms of terrorism as well, blowing things up. I kid you not, blowing things up. I'll read you that again. Scientists say they have been stunned by how quickly young children's lungs began to recover and grow after pollution restrictions were brought in where they lived. Researchers found that children in London whose lung growth had been stunted by pollution showed impressive improvements after the introduction of an ultra-low emission zone in 2019 reduced emissions. The hysterical headlines that you hearing a moment ago were about the expansion of that ultra-low emission zone. There may be other factors that could also be considered as contributing to an improvement in the growth of lungs that will decrease risk of asthma, heart disease, diabetes, and even premature death. Wow. Children, would you believe, are more vulnerable to pollution because their lungs and immune systems are still developing, and when they are outside, they tend to be closer to the ground and nearer the sources of exhaust fumes. So I want to talk today about ULEZ. I'm not sure how much we talked about it back in the day because I don't know, actually. I'd hear everybody else frothing at the mouth and spewing all sorts of what sounded to me like nonsense. But I think perhaps I lacked... You can't prove a negative, can you? So if you say to me, it's like Brexit. It's very like Brexit. It's going to be awful. It's going to be brilliant. It's going to be brilliant. You can't prove it the other way. And if the weight of the argument is all on one side of the scales, you can't prove what's going to happen in the future. So where people promised that Brexit would be brilliant and everybody who really understand the issue knew that it wouldn't, the people who really understood the issue couldn't get any purchase on the people who had been persuaded that it was going to be brilliant. And with ULEZ, the people who insisted it was all going to be awful and it was disastrous and dangerous and the end of civilization as we know it, they got all the best tunes on this occasion. And the people who understood the stuff couldn't really get much purchase. And Sadiq Khan pressed on with it. Sadiq Khan persevered. Boris Johnson, to be fair, was also a fan of this kind of policy. But I want you to help me work out why everybody went so mad. Because they really did go mad. They went absolutely insane over this policy. And I still don't properly understand why. It was, I think, the first sign for me that Keir Starmer might not be quite the messianic political figure that some of us hoped he was, because there was a by-election in Uxbridge that turned into a sort of referendum on ULEZ. And the Labour candidate was really struggling as a consequence of all the propaganda that was being put out there about ULEZ. And the Tory got in, and Keir Starmer talked about, I don't think he actually used the dread phrase legitimate concerns, but he kind of said, well, fair enough. He did quite a lot of that with voters who believed things that weren't true, whether it was immigration or ULEZ. He said, well, fair enough. Words to that effect. I'll get you the exact quotes, or at least I'll try. And that was the first time, looking back, that I found myself thinking, oh, I wish you'd stood up to them, mate. I know you've got a lot on your plate. I know you've got a lot to do, but I wish you'd stood up to the liars, because it's a lonely old business. And it would have been nice if you'd done it. And he didn't. So I'm going to tell you a story after the next break, which I can't remember telling you before. I may have alluded to it, but I don't think I've told you the story in quite as much detail as I would like to do today. But I want you to book your place on the switchboard now, if you can, in answer to the question of why did everybody go so mad? Look, Ian Duncan Donuts might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he's a fundamentally decent man. He's done some amazing work in the arena of the Magnitsky sanctions, and he's not somebody who, if I asked you to name a politician who's in favour of violence on your street, you probably wouldn't reach immediately for Ian Duncan Donuts, would you? So why did he go so mad about this issue? Why did you go so mad about it? What the hell happened? Because this is one of the best news stories that we're going to see in a while. I grant you, at the moment, it's confined to London, but it is a story about scientists conducting research into a decision taken by a politician and concluding that they have been stunned by its success. Think about that sentence. Stunned by how quickly young children's lungs began to recover and grow after pollution restrictions were brought in. So ULEZ has delivered, in ways that politicians and policies rarely do, exactly what was promised. And yet, while Sadiq Khan was preparing to introduce it, he was pilloried in a way I have never witnessed before, or since, actually, in British politics. And that is part of the story that I'm going to tell you after this. Before that, or during that, or after that, I want you to tell me why you think everybody went so mad. Just take a moment, look back, and try to work it out. I'll give you some starters. Was it just because it was Sadiq Khan? And for reasons that I'm sure I don't need to lay out to you, a certain type of character has a huge problem with anything that has his fingerprints on it or his name on it? Was it the Englishman's car is his castle? But again, an awful lot of nonsense. How did people fall for that nonsense, that something was going to be threatened or something was going to be compromised? And then, of course, the escalation into the mild-mannered former Conservative leader Ian Duncan Donuts endorsing violence, encouraging violence. I look back on some of these things that I found a story about that. This is a bit mad. That shows you how old I am. I found myself thinking, I'm pretty sure Ian Duncan Donuts said that it was okay to smash things up or cement them. And then I thought, no, he didn't. So I looked it up. I found a story. And guess what Gob on a Stick is quoted smack in the middle of the story? Here you go. One of these vandals was in court today pleading guilty to a crime Ian Duncan Donuts explicitly encouraged. This stuff should matter, said some pompous so-and-so on Twitter. Yeah, all right, it was me. It's always slightly odd when you're reading a news story and then you find a little clip of yourself smack in the middle of it that you have no memory of. So I was right. It was Ian Duncan Donuts. But why did everybody go mad on that specific issue? I know we go mad about lots of things lots of the time, but this is insane. The fact that lung function of children has improved measurably to such a degree that the scientists conducting the research are, quotes, stunned. And in every single corner of the British media, it seemed, at the time, people were not just saying, oh, I don't think this is a very good idea, or this is a bit problematic. They were insisting that it was pretty close to evil. And it worked, to the point where a by-election result in West London was decided on this single issue, where, just like Brexit, the people who voted for it had absolutely no understanding of what they were voting for. I just want your memories, your thoughts, your insights on why, and maybe you can do it the other way around. Maybe you want to lay a little bit of criticism at the people who should have been defending and selling it better. But it still will involve an answer to the question of why did everybody go so mad about ULEZ? Because it has worked like a dream. And how often can you say that about an originally controversial political policy?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't know what word you prefer. Berserk? Why did everybody go berserk about ULEZ? Because it has worked like a dream, an extraordinary success story. Ben in Walthamstow, mate, I'm going to tell a story. It might take a while, so apologies because you're up next. I think I may have told you elements of this story before, but it is something I want to share as an illustration of how insane everything went, all right? I was interviewing Sadiq Khan on stage at the Royal Festival Hall for the launch of his book about pollution. And it was a paid event, right? So people had paid, I think, 20 quid, 25 quid for a ticket and a book. And I've done interviews with the Mayor of London at other venues in his role as mayor. So they're run by City Hall and people can come along and they can protest as vociferously as they like. And we had a few disrupted quite badly by people in Stephen Yaxley Lennon merch or MAGA hats shouting racist abuse at him. And I have a sort of 3 strikes and you're out rule. So, you know, you're warned again, you're removed by security, and it works pretty well. But I think there was a feeling that if you're paying 25 quid to come to what was essentially a very glorified book launch, then you're probably not going to be there to shout racist abuse or disrupt proceedings. I would also add that there were children in the room. Not like mega young, because that would be a weird thing to take a 4-year-old to, but there were certainly children as young as 11 or 12 in the room, including some that I know, some that I'm related to. That's the room I want you to imagine. So it is a book launch at the Royal Festival Hall in a lovely and civilised circumstances, and the focus, if you like, of the attention is Sadiq Khan and his book Breathe, tackling the climate emergency. And within about 2 minutes of him starting to speak, somebody in the audience got to their feet and shouted, and I can't say the words live on the... Actually, Keith, have you got it ready? No? All right. I should give you a heads up about this stuff, shouldn't I? I know, it's not fair, mate. Just, what's that? Keith's on the phone to the union. Within a couple of minutes of him starting to speak, somebody stood up in this big hall where people had gathered for essentially positive purposes and shouted at the top of his voice, off Goebbels, you... And we're backstage looking at each other because he was reading a bit of his book and I was going to come on after 5 or 10 minutes and do an interview with him in front of the crowd. And we're backstage looking at each other and we're thinking, whoa, he's a bit weird. And then someone else did it. And my memory isn't hazy as such, as just a little bit jumbled. But I fast forward now to the point where I come onto the stage and start to restore order. But what I want to draw your attention to is the viciousness. This is not heckling or political badinage. This isn't even what you might call an exercise of free speech. This is effing and jeffing and using the worst word of all in front of 12-year-old children because your brain has been boiled so completely either by the fact that Sadiq Khan is Mayor of London and the fact that Sadiq Khan is Sadiq Khan, or, and this I think is more interesting, your brain has been boiled completely by something you've been told about this scheme he's bringing in that we learn today literally reverses or improves lung growth in children who have been negatively affected by pollution. I mean, F off Goebbels, you... in response to something that is measurably and demonstrably helping young children's lungs to recover and grow after pollution had negatively affected them. And it went on. And the particular clown I remember had a whistle, which obviously he thought was a brilliant idea. I remember saying to him as he was escorted out of the room, don't forget, when the kids ask where you've been tonight, mate, don't forget to tell them what you were doing. And tell them about the whistle. They'll really look up to you then. And maybe your kids have got damaged lungs. Maybe you didn't realise that your children were growing up in a city where pollution was damaging their lungs, where all our children have grown up in a city where the pollution damaged their lungs. And a politician brings in a policy that they knew, I think, was going to do this. Otherwise, why on earth would they have done it? As he writes in the book, it was his own asthma that prompted his proper investigation of the policy. That and the death of Ella Adukisi-Deborah, who was the first person in the UK to have air pollution listed as a cause of death. And her mum was there that night. Deborah was there that night, witnessing these people. And I wouldn't mention it if I thought that they were entirely unrepresentative or freakish, but they were empowered by people like Ian Duncan Donuts saying that it was fine to vandalise equipment. They were empowered by that long litany of headlines in The Spectator talking about how awful it would be and how it should lead to his downfall and how they were lying and how they were taking cash from the poorest and how they were empowered by a much broader context than their own boiled brains. And they were empowered to behave in ways that I've happily never witnessed in public before or since. I mean, I've been on marches where the kind of self-appointed chroniclers of our times will stick a phone in the face of anybody they vaguely recognise and try and ask them difficult questions. And I've encountered, obviously, unhappiness at political meetings, but nothing so personal, so vicious and so visceral. In a room where not only were there children, but also the mother of the first person in the history of the United Kingdom to have air pollution listed as a cause of death. And this army, they called themselves Blade Runners, didn't they, at one point? The ones who were chopping down the cameras with chainsaws. I think I have to be careful because I don't keep very close eyes on the legal cases that are unfolding, but an awful lot of Twitter heroes appointed themselves as great enemies of ULEZ without having the first idea what they were doing or why. So I wonder if we can tell them what on earth happened during that period. Why did ULEZ drive so many people absolutely berserk? I'll take any answer you've got to this. If you think it's obvious, don't hold back. If you think it's not obvious, don't hold back either. Thought I might have something more original to say at that point, but it turns out I didn't. Because I don't think about it often, but I do think about it whenever political violence is in the news, whenever Nigel Farage complains about being the most attacked politician in the country, a country, of course, where 2 and possibly even 3 politicians have been, well, 2 politicians have definitely been killed as a consequence of being politicians. I can't even today understand what on earth turned those people into what they became that night. Maybe they were always like that, but I don't believe they were. Something about this story, something about this policy, something about this politician sent people absolutely berserk. And I'll tell you something for nothing. The people who did it to them, the commentators who did it to them, the journalists who did it to them, they're not going to be talking about this anytime soon. They're not going to be talking about this any more than they were talking about Jason Arday at the beginning of this week. They're not going to be talking about the consequences or the aftermath of something that they couldn't get enough of while it was going on. I don't know what motivates them or what passes for a conscience. So we'll go further back in the story and we'll ask, what was it about ULEZ that sent people berserk? 0345 6060 973. Dominic Ellis has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11. It's funny, isn't it, when you list those headlines from right-wing organs attacking ULEZ, and then we'll keep an eye on what kind of levels of coverage they give to the scientific research reported today showing that children's lungs, some sentences really stick with you, don't they, began to recover and grow after pollution restrictions were brought in. We'll speak to one of the scientists responsible for that research shortly, but we better get some other voices on the radio before you start thinking that this has ceased to be a phone-in show. Ryan is in Walthamstow. Ryan, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
First time.
Welcome.
So, yeah, look, I live in Walthamstow, just probably 500 metres away from where the ULEZ cameras kick in on the Billet Road roundabout. And there's no one that lives near me in this community that is upset about ULEZ. And on good days, it's tangibly different, the air quality. I have to walk over the 406. Yeah, I have to cross the 406 at the Billet Road roundabout to take my son to nursery because he's out of the ULEZ zone for that. And on bad days, just crossing that road, it's tangible, it's thick in the air, and you do worry about your kids. And the other thing I wanted to say was actually I grew up in Hertfordshire and Essex, so I've got loads of friends in those areas. All the people that I know that ever moaned about ULEZ don't live in London. They've got great suburban air quality, and it was the inconvenience of having to pay to come to work that was clearly stoking their hatred.
And that's quite a logical response, explanation, but what's not logical is your use of the word hatred, because something really strange happened, didn't it? That it wasn't like a normal political policy. It was. I'm trying to think of a parallel, but I can't actually. There was fury about the poll tax, of course, but that was easy to argue that's not actually going to help keep children alive. Do you see what I mean? The idea that this was being brought in, the first thing you need to do is persuade people that it's not going to do the things that the politician is saying that it's going to do.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of climate change conversations or fossil fuel or so there's probably a bit of movement under the surface from the petrochemical lobby.
Is it like reverse NIMBYism though? Like you've got not in my backyard, you don't want people building things, but actually you're quite happy when it's if something inconveniences you when you're going out of your backyard. You kind of don't care about it's your kids are safe, they're in a nice green environment and the air quality is great. You almost don't think about other people's kids because they're outside, out of mind.
I guess it's going to be really hard to provide answers to the question that I'm asking without casting the people that we're talking about in a very negative light, because they behaved absolutely abominably. And that's who I'm really talking about. I'm not necessarily talking about the people who just didn't think that it was... it's not a very great idea, or even people who perhaps couldn't afford £12.50 to come to work per day. But the people who went bonkers, that's
the threshold is very, very low, though, right? So for that £12.50, you have to be driving a horrible car. Like, I know
that's
people
right.
that have got like 12-year-old hatchbacks that don't qualify. Like they're quite happy in their cheap car pootling in and not having to pay £12.50. It really is like the cars that are eligible really aren't very good.
And maybe there was a bad job at explaining that. An awful lot of people who thought they were going to be affected by it actually weren't going to be affected by it. And someone, I don't know who, possibly Sadiq Khan, although he did his best, could have done a better job of making that clear. I mean, yes, you're right. When you taste the air when you're in a place that hasn't got a ULEZ zone and you find yourself in an area of quite built-up traffic, you can tell. And that is why the lungs of children in London are in better health than they have been for years. Libertarians, says Emma, don't like being told what to do, especially by brown people. I do think that experience I had at the Royal Festival Hall makes me very much a subscriber to that school of thought, but it still doesn't put the ratcheting up of the dial into context. And here's the quote from Starmer. After they lost the Uxbridge and South Ruislip by-election. He said, well, it was always going to be tough. We didn't take it in 1997 when we had a landslide victory. And then he said, ULEZ was the reason we didn't win there yesterday. We've all got to reflect on that, including the mayor. And then I think Chris Mason at the BBC pushed him to say whether he believed the ULEZ expansion should be paused or scrapped. And he declined to do so. That's what I meant. That was the first time I began to think, oh, come on, mate. You've got to push back against this stuff. You didn't lose the by-election because of ULEZ. You lost the by-election because of misinformation and disinformation around ULEZ, or, if you want to get really technical about it, over poor communication, because there is an argument that ULEZ... people with rubbish old cars that Ryan just referred to, more likely to be poor, inevitably, not getting the compensation that they deserved, and the clarity of the scrappage scheme, and in fact the scrappage scheme itself arrived too late to address their concerns. So, you might have said that. But ULEZ was always going to do good. And my industry and your circle was full of people who thought that it was some sort of diabolical assault upon unspecified freedoms and liberties. Tom's in Berwick on Tweed. Tom, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. Basically, I'd like to say, overall, I support it. What it's done and the improvement to the air quality. However, I do believe the rollout was very poorly done. My family, including myself, had to replace all of our cars. We're not wealthy people. We all had to replace our cars, and though overall we agree with it, we're now all in finance. Well, before we owned our cars outright, and they weren't worth a lot of money at all. And that, to me, is where there was a lot of anger.
The scrappage scheme would have helped people whose cars weren't worth much.
It was the amount that you would have got from the scrappage scheme.
So what did you get?
So I got, what was it, about £600? So I think my cousin's got like £1,200. You know, like very low amounts of money.
Well, £3,000 was the top rate if you were trading in your old model, your higher emission vehicle. So you're raising from about £750 to £3,000, and companies like Kia, Renault, and Toyota periodically ran private trade-in incentives. But you're right, some people had to take a financial hit. That's not who we're talking about, though, is it? We're talking about the people that went around pouring cement into cameras or chopping them down with chainsaws. What happened to them?
100% right. And now I do frequent at some pubs where there are some individuals there that are quite racist. There was no doubt about it. And I do say, and I said to your producer, that they could have been offered £5 a day by Sadiq Khan and they wouldn't have been happy. Because
it was Sadiq Khan doing it?
Yeah.
I just need to ask, because people will get cross with me if I don't. It's a big issue, is it, in Berwick-on-Tweed?
In Berwick, it's not, but there's no restrictions here. But
no, I meant you're not coming into London very often, are you, in your new car?
No, I work in the area, but I still have a lot of family.
Exactly. No, I knew that. I didn't want people to think I hadn't noticed where you were calling from. Absolutely beautiful part of the world, by the way. 20 to 12 is the time. Adam is in Leytonstone. Adam, what would you like to say?
Yeah, look, my thoughts are I was pretty much against the whole ULEZ situation, and now I'm sort of for it. That reason is because I own a retail store on a high street in East London, and if you look outside my store, there is so much pollution and so much dirt from all the cars that go past. I've developed asthma in the 4 months that I've opened this store up.
Good Lord.
I've got an open door policy, which means my door has to be open for my business to actually thrive and people to come in.
Okay.
And what Waltham Forest did is they built something called Mini Holland.
Yes.
Right? That was built in Enfield, Kingston and Waltham Forest. So all the side roads are cut off. So where there was no traffic on the high street, there is now a ridiculous amount of traffic on the high street because people can't turn left or right to get out of this area.
What you're describing is quite an odd and personal journey. Do you know that it's exactly the same as Sadiq Khan's? Although he didn't start from a position of opposition, he just didn't particularly care. Or he didn't care as much as he ended up caring, literally because he had adult onset asthma just like you, and looked into the reasons why.
About this
did you?
Myself. Yeah, I did. I met him at an event. This was before I had this retail business.
Okay.
And I said to him kindly, I said, you know, hello, what do you
the problem I've got now, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I'll let you carry on. The problem I've got now is if you said it to him kindly, then you're not the kind of person that I'm talking about today. You didn't actually go bonkers, did you?
If going bonkers doesn't get anywhere, does it?
Well, I shouldn't have told them that, but on you go. So what you said to him, why are you doing it?
So I said, what's with ULEZ? And he turned around and he said, the amount that the NHS spend on cancer treatment and lung treatment and this and that and ammonia, we decided to introduce ULEZ. Okay, fine, I understand that. But the local government have introduced Mini Hollands, right, which is absolutely ridiculous. I don't know if you know the borough of Waltham Forest.
I don't, and nor do the massive majority of people listening to this programme. So while I fully appreciate that it's a bugbear for you, I think you've said enough for us to get a picture of what has happened there. So again, it's one of those things where, you know, centralised politics delivers something positive and local politics perhaps knocks some of the gloss off it. But you didn't really appreciate the need for ULEZ until you got asthma yourself.
100 million %.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't. But then
I
there's
salute your
buses that still also run a diesel, I think, as well, right? Buses.
Some do, some don't.
Buses.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not going to stop everything. And you know, I personally feel like they should stop the buses first and lead by example, right? When I say stop the buses, I mean make them fully electric or carbon or hydrogen, whatever it may be. Don't know what it is out there at the moment. I drive a Tesla. I drive an electric car myself.
So you've gone full. You've gone all the way, haven't you? You've gone from a skeptic to and I'm sorry that you've got asthma, but a fully paid up member of the, do things sensibly, keep things clean kind of lobby. Adam, take care. And I'm sorry for your plight. I really am. But both your health plight and the pollution plight that remains in your area. But it is, I don't know if no one's going to ring me up and say, oh, I was an absolute idiot, James. I was one of those people shouting abuse at Sadiq Khan at the Royal Festival Hall. I was one of those people marching up and down in my Stephen Yaxley Lennon merch, claiming that ULEZ was some sort of appalling, or bringing Sadiq Khan's religion into a conversation about pollution controls. And here's what happened to me. Here's my story of how I got radicalised. But the rest of us can at least come up with a theory, can't we, on what the hell happened? It is 11:45, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. None of the journalists who joined in will be addressing the latest developments in this story anytime soon, and you can bet your house on that.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:47. Would you like to play a missing word round? This is quite a fun one, actually. Here's a headline from today's news that I think you will struggle to fill in the missing word. German told to rip out shower as it is to blank. German told to rip out shower as it is to blank. What do you think the missing word is? The word where I said blank, obviously, is where the missing word is. One day it'll be like that Two Ronnies sketch. Did you ever watch it, where the answer to the last question was... Anyway, it's not that. The missing word is the one that I've replaced with the word blank. German told to rip out shower as it is to blank. And if you get that right from a standing start without cheating or looking it up, I will give you the money myself. 11:48 is the time. ULEZ, it's working a treat. How and why did everyone go so mad? And so far, we're failing collectively. This is a criticism of me, not you, because if we fail when we are doing something together, it is because I'm not asking the questions correctly or framing the conversation in the way that it needs to be framed. But reasonable reservations about the way it was introduced or some elements of the scrappage scheme do not address the question I'm asking, which is, in a very professional, grown-up fashion, why did everybody else go bonkers about ULEZ? And I'm asking it because today it is reported that the results have even left the scientists who conducted the research stunned by the success, particularly in the area of lung recovery and lung regrowth among children. Professor Gert Randauer is a professor of diversity and public health and director of the Institute for Health and Wellbeing Research at the University of Bedfordshire. But for our purposes today, he was also the co-senior study lead on the Luton site that looked into this finding. Stunned is a rare word to see in scientific journalism, Gertch, but stunned is the word I saw today.
Morning, James. Thank you for inviting me on. Yes, we're very surprised. I mean, this is the first study to provide evidence of improvements in lung development related to a clean air zone. And it's clear to see that the cleaner air from London's ultra-low emission zone is linked to improvements in children's lung development.
And you're tracking the health of lungs, or you're comparing children of one age at one point in the study with children at the same age in another point in the study? Which way round is it done?
So the way we did it was we assessed if implementation of the clean air zone did impact an improvement in children's lung growth, and we did that by assessing just over 3,400 children over 5 years, and we compared London with Luton, and we were able to show that there was a much accelerated growth in lung development in London compared to Luton.
Good Lord. So it's bad news for not just Luton, but it's bad news for any built-up area that doesn't have an ultra-low emission zone, in a way, this research, until they get one, or not.
So I think the study is good news. So the study provides evidence that if we can improve air quality, we can impact on children's lung growth, and that can impact then on longer-term conditions like asthma, chronic pulmonary disease. So there's lots of things for policymakers to consider. As scientists, we present our findings, and hopefully policymakers may want to think about how they can factor in our findings into their decision-making.
Why the scale of surprise, then? Presumably you were expecting improvement, but just not quite this much, is that right?
So I think we need to bear in mind that nobody knew what the health impact of clean air zones would be. I think we could easily have surmised that air quality would improve, which it did, but nobody was certain about the impact it would have on children's health. And it's so important because we have to remember that air pollution, does have a detrimental impact on delays in lung growth. So the fact that lung function did improve, but at a much quicker rate in London compared to Luton, does give us some confidence that by introducing air quality measures, you can have a tangible impact on children's health.
There could, I presume, have been other factors contributing as well, though, could there? I mean, I don't know whether, it's looking at the time period, lockdown might have meant children weren't out and about as much, there were fewer cars on the road. But I guess that speaks to the pollution argument, doesn't it? Even if it wasn't necessarily ULEZ that meant there was less pollution in the air. Is there anything other than pollution that might conceivably have contributed to this phenomenon?
Great question. So I think one of the things that we were very careful to think about was, by having the comparator site of Luton, we did account for other factors like COVID, lockdown, demographic changes. So what we were able to show was that the ultra-low emission zone was the key driver of improved air quality and lung health. And we did account for the pandemic, and the improvements in air quality were consistent even outside the lockdown periods. And the study design allowed us to isolate the ultra-low emission zone as the main factor.
Thank you. I sense from your very measured and academic demeanour, Professor Randhawa, that you're not going to want to indulge in the next question that I'm going to ask you. But I'm going to ask you anyway. Do you know why so many people went so bonkers about this when it was being mooted, introduced and implemented? That's a scientific term, bonkers, by the way.
So to clarify, I mean, our study is about evaluating a public health intervention. We're not into politics. And what I would say to your listeners is evidence clearly shows that the ultra-low emission zone improved air quality and the lung health in London's children. And if cities around the world were to implement a similar intervention, they could potentially improve the health of children living in those areas. And I think that's quite an interesting future to contemplate.
It's desperately important, and I'm very grateful to you for clarifying all of that with us. But I think you're probably as baffled as I am by the violence of the response, not just sort of physical and as mental, verbal, but physical as well. That is amazing stuff. On we go. Professor Gertz Randhawa, thank you. The co-senior study lead on the Luton site. So as the professor has just made me realise, I could have done a slightly better job of explaining this. They've literally taken two cohorts of children, one inside the ULEZ zone and one not inside it, and measured their lungs. And one of the ways they measure it, Keith, I don't know if you knew this, you take a massive breath in and then they measure how hard you can blow out. And if you, I don't know if you, last time you were short of breath, or if you got perhaps, if you had a bad COVID, or if you have had asthma or things, it's scary, you know. I was talking to a colleague about being winded as a kid earlier today, and it's one of the really frightening things that happens to you as a child if you're lucky enough not to have a traumatic childhood. When you get winded on the rugby pitch, or you fall out of a tree or something, and you can't get air into your lungs, it's absolutely terrifying. And so this research, this science, this progress, this politics, because it is, of course, politics, even though the professor quite rightly very, very, very politely declined to get even vaguely involved in that side of the conversation. You can't separate the two from the memories that we have of how certain people treated this subject. Why do you think is it the usual suspects? If you found someone who went bonkers about ULEZ, would they be obsessed with small boats? Would they be in favour of Brexit? Would they have thought Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy? Would they all be Nigel Farage fans? They would, wouldn't they? I'm not even. Would they? I don't know. It is 11:56. Climate change deniers, probably. All the other things as well. Pro-austerity? I don't know. Maybe that's not fair. Most of them. Ben's in Walthamstow. Ben, what made you pick up the phone, if you can remember?
Big fan, James. I picked up the phone because this is actually a really hard question to answer. I was kind of against ULEZ at the start. I've got a classic car. I'm probably not the real demographic of a London everyday driver, but I enjoy having my classic car down here. And I think the question's difficult because why someone goes bonkers and cuts down cameras, I don't know. I think that's at the extreme end of it. But I think those individuals are empowered by a bigger demographic of people that feel a certain way about cars. Yes. And I think I kind of put it into three categories. One of your earlier callers already tapped into this. The simple thing is a cost. To replace what was a great car for a substandard one, or one that's on finance that is.
But you're talking about classic cars.
No, I'm not really. I think
because you could drive a 13-year-old petrol vehicle in the ULEZ zone without being subject to. Without being subject to the. To the charge.
Yeah. You definitely could, but I think all three of these things make up a collective picture. I think, I was looking at some of the cars initially that didn't get weren't, they didn't get exemption, and they were getting sold a lot outside London, and that's something that's just kind of tough for people. I think the second thing I'd say on it is people get very attached to their cars.
That's true. An Englishman's car is his castle. That was one of my theories.
Right. I think there's a big, and I certainly know from the classic car scene, these people are going harder than paint on this. And then the third thing I think is people believe the lies, and I definitely fell into this category as well. And what I mean by that is we had the scrappage scheme in this country. I remember somewhere in the 90s we were told get diesels, they're more energy efficient.
Yeah, same here. Actually I should have said this. We had a diesel when it came in, and it took us a while to get rid of it. It cost me a flipping fortune. And we bought it because they told us it was going to be better for the environment than a petrol car. You're right. I'd forgotten that. So
I just feel like people don't like it when we're told, right, head in this direction and go this way. We're like, okay, then new evidence comes out and then it changes.
Yeah.
And that so I feel like everyone gets very, very divisive about this. But certainly for me, the ULEZ thing, I'm overwhelmed with happiness to find out it worked. Truthfully,
and that's a normal person's reaction, isn't it? Oh, I didn't like the look of it when it first came in, and it caused me, or potentially caused me, some personal discomfort or cost. But goodness me, children's lungs are recovering. What more do you want? I mean, for heaven's sake, if you had to make a list of things that you should be in favour of, and someone said, where are we putting children's lungs improving on this list? You'd have to be absolutely hideous not to put it quite high up, wouldn't you?
Yeah, do you know the trick today is not going to be finding someone like me who understands and empathises why people are upset. It's going to be speaking to somebody that feels like, yes, I cut down a ULEZ camera and I campaigned against it, but now this new information's come out, so I'm capable of being cool.
Listen, I never stop believing, Ben. I think I can get them if I try hard enough. I failed today, but I will blame that on myself. And of course, there's quite a few people are pointing out the if your classic car was more than 40 years old, you could get a ULEZ exemption. It's coming up to 12 noon. It's August. Which means we're going to allow ourselves another subject or another question that will never get filed under the most serious things I've ever asked you. And it's not linked. It's categorically not linked to the events of this hour. But if I were to tell you that Labour's new farming minister, and it's an accusation he denies, has been accused of fainting at the sight of meat. I'll say that again because you might think that was a word missing. There isn't. Fainting at the sight of meat. I wonder if you can work out what topic I'm thinking of doing next.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time. Hi, James. Writes Matt. I've just tuned in. Have you just done a motoring phone-in? No. It was a phone-in about people going bonkers. Admittedly, over a motoring-related subject. But the reasons why we don't do motoring subjects is because they're often very boring. There was nothing boring about people up to and including a former leader of the Conservative Party endorsing criminality and vandalism because their brains had been boiled by media coverage of ULEZ, or Khan's ULEZ, as you are supposed to call it. And somebody told me this, so I thought I'd double-check. It is, I'm told, currently the policy of Reform's London mayoral candidate, Layla Cunningham. Don't message me, I don't make the bookings. Reform's mayoral candidate, Layla Cunningham, pledging to scrap it. So there is a politician who wants children's lungs to start shrinking again. or suffering. Unless, of course, she reflects upon this scientific research and decides that wasn't a very clever policy in the first place. But it wasn't a very satisfying phoning, that, was it? I thought the professor was great. The calls were really good. They're interesting people, one and all. But we didn't get close to finding out why everybody went so bonkers, did we? But that means if history repeats itself, we'll probably return to it, and I will do it again one day until I actually get answers to the bonkers people. Now, a clue as to how Labour's new farming minister, being accused of fainting at the sight of meat, is set to inspire our next conversation. It is not, as 2 or 3 people have suggested, because I am about to ask you jobs you were not fit to do, jobs you were not suited to. I think there's a piece in the Times today about people's disastrous summer jobs, which is very jolly and very good fun. And that was a contender for our third hour today. And I reserve the right to return to it later in the week. But that's not what I want to talk about today. There's something absolutely fascinating, not about meat, but about fainting. A special shout to Steve, who has reminded me of a line from one of my all-time favourite films, Withnail and I, in which Uncle Monty says, "I can never touch meat until it's cooked. As a youth, I used to weep in butchers' shops." It's fainting that I find fascinating. So Stephen Morgan, who I think has probably been unfairly treated here, was visiting a refrigerated storage unit at a food processing plant in the Lake District, and had to be helped out by staff. I imagine in the current climate, or in last week's climate, coming out of a refrigerated storage unit into a heat wave when you're not used to it is enough to make most people feel a little bit faint. But one of these farmers gets on the phone to the Sun, and they all conspire to create a story about him being frightened or faint at the sight of meat. And then you phone a kind of rent-a-quote Tory to say, "We already knew Labour don't understand rural communities. What we didn't realise is that seeing high-quality British beef makes Labour ministers sick." And Mr Morgan, I suspect quite correctly, responded by pointing out that moving between extreme heat and cold storage would be enough to make an awful lot of people feel faint. Do not phone me if you fainted for what you might describe as logical reasons. So you fainted in circumstances that have a medical rationale, i.e., I got up very quickly. I'd had my feet in the air for 2 hours. Don't ask why, please. I'd had my feet in the air for 2 hours, and when I jumped up really quickly to answer the door, I fainted. I want to know today about the time that you literally fainted at the sight of something. Do you see what I mean? So someone scared you to the point of fainting. In comics, and I used to read a lot of comics as a kid, in the Beano, people were fainting all the time. People were dropping like flies in the Beano. Minnie the Minx would pull off some wizard scam, and her mum would faint in shock or horror. They'd set up some sort of hoax or some scary moment, and a prank would prompt Dennis the Menace's. Usually mums fainted, wasn't it? There's quite a bit of is it misogyny? I don't know. That's too strong a word. A bit of misogyny here. Do you know what I blame for that? It's not awnings. It's corsets. I blame corsets. The reason why women fainted a lot in the 19th century and beyond was because they had to wear corsets. Keith, if you were strapped into a corset, mate, you'd probably faint at a slight change in the temperature. So I think the reason why historically we perceive, there might be some evidence to discount this observation, but I suspect men are just as likely to faint as women. And the reason why women are perceived as being more likely to faint is because of corsets, because they were strapped into these ludicrous contraptions. I bet working class women didn't faint a lot when the upper class women were dropping like flies. So fainting. Now, I know it's lunchtime for many of you. Tough, sorry. You're probably going to hear stuff this hour that puts you right off your pot noodle. I just want to know about the sight of which either made you faint or you witnessed someone else faint. There's a chance that the second element of this might be even funnier than the first element. Because, I mean, what if someone fainted at the sight of you, Keith? Someone just walked into the room, saw your fizzle, and just went over like a tree. And the thing that is important to bear in mind It could also be something nice. Do people ever faint with joy? You faint with joy, right? So you fainted at the sight of something. It's not about temperature fluctuations. It's not about anything like that. You fainted at the sight of something. 0345 606 0973. Now, I think it's important to stress, if you haven't witnessed someone fainting, it's quite traumatic. It's not like a gentle lowering of the body to the ground or a nearby chair. If you haven't gone over like a tree, you haven't fainted. There are two, I think, brilliant examples of this, both fictional, although one was pretending not to be. If you've never seen the footage of a television presenter called Gillian McKeith on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, quotes, fainting, end quotes, then look it up now and thank me later. All right? That is how you can tell whether someone is fainting authentically or not. Because if you fainted authentically, it's like flicking a switch. I've seen it happen quite a few times. It's never happened to me, thank goodness, I don't think. No, it's never happened to me. It's like flicking a switch. You're standing upright. You might have a moment, a very brief moment of wooziness, and then bang, you've gone over like a felled tree. And the other one, I'm pretty sure, is in Curb Your Enthusiasm, isn't it? Isn't there a scene in Curb Your Enthusiasm where he kind of, whoa, whoa. I hope these sound effects are working and you don't think there's a ghost in the studio. You kind of go, oh, and then you go over. Have I got time to tell you one of my all-time favourite stories about myself? The reason why I know that fainting is not something you can fake is based largely on an episode in my career 25 years ago or more, when I thought very seriously about fainting. Have you, I mean, this isn't the phone in. The phone is, you have actually fainted at the sight of something. What was it? What happened? 0345 606 0973. And perhaps, the less likely it is, the more welcome your call will be. So I'm not going to put any words in your mouth because I don't know what less likely source of fainting would be. But the thing is, you saw something, you witnessed something occurred, and you went over like a tree. And scientifically, let me just look at my screen. Scientifically, so far, it's all men. So that proves scientifically that I'm correct. The only reason why we have a perception that women faint more than men is because of corsets and the legacy from the 19th century. So I was getting absolutely rollicked by a news editor back in the day. I've told this story a lot of times. So I'm going to tell it again, but I'll tell it quickly. And you know, I don't know if this has ever happened to you. Happily, the younger generation don't really have to put up with this sort of thing. The worst thing sometimes about a public rollicking is the audience, right? It's not so much, if it was in a private room, if you close the door behind you, you could just sort of plead, really, and just sort of say, oh, please, look, I know I shouldn't have done it, but just give us a break. I won't do it again. Stop shouting at me. Or you could just sort of zone it out, but you're in a room full of people, some of whom will be feeling your pain, some of whom will be loving every minute of it, and he is absolutely monstering you. Just got into the back end of this kind of behaviour on Fleet Street. It would be frowned upon now, I'm sure, and he's doing it, and I'm thinking, this is never going to end. This is awful. There's nothing I can do. I can't spit. I'm taking my medicine, but he is laying it on thick. And I find myself thinking, how can I, A, make this stop, and B, come out of this situation with some sympathy? And I remember very clearly thinking to myself, you're going to have to faint, mate. You're going to have to faint. And then I remember very clearly thinking to myself, you're really going to hurt yourself if you faint, because you can't go down like a deck chair, like a folded chair. You can't go down in stages. Everyone will know that you're faking. If you're going to faint, you've got to go down like a tree. And I didn't do it. I thought about it. There's another story, someone else who was on Fleet Street in the same sort of era told me about someone who did it, someone who did fake a faint in a newsroom just to make it stop. And the news editor just bent down and started poking them and shouting, get up, I haven't finished. So it might have backfired even if I had successfully pretended to faint, whether successfully or otherwise. But the point I'm making is that it is, for witnesses, it's traumatic because the body goes from being turgid, if you like, or upright, to being a sack of potatoes. I mean, it's very hard to get people back. Do you see what I mean? To catch someone, if they've got 15 stone, say, of human being, which is even if someone's injured, they are going to be part of the process of getting them back on their feet. There's going to be an element, unless someone is either fast asleep or unconscious, there is going to be an element of help from the person that you're trying to help. They're going to be able to get up on one elbow, or they're going to be able to lean into your arm as you try and help them to the door. I mean, but if someone faints and you're in charge, I mean, if you're a nurse or a doctor and someone faints on your watch, if they're standing up, that's terrible. They could do themselves. They could come out of a fainting incident more injured than they were going into it. But that's what I want you to do now. And this is, I'm doing these topics. Yesterday, if you missed it, the topic was, special voice, have you ever been attacked by a wild animal? And today's topic is, have you ever fainted at the sight of something? And these are topics designed to sort of lighten the mood a little, to paper over the fact that the Parliament is not sitting at the moment, so the news agenda is a little bit more arid than usual, but also to give people who haven't phoned in before but are beginning to think that they might quite like to, a nice, easy run at the switchboard. Because you've got a great story to tell. No one's going to have a row. No one's going to have a set to. It's just a nice sort of friendly, communal, So that is this topic. Have you ever fainted at the sight of something? Or, not sure yet whether this is going to be more or less interesting than being the first person in the story. Have you ever seen someone else faint at the sight of something? And obviously, absolutely intrinsic to this is, what was it? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:18 is the time. Shall I do the missing word before I forget? I don't get this, really. German told to rip out shower as it is too blank. The answer's nice. No, I mean, the answer is nice. Not the answer's not... German told to rip out shower as it is too nice. A German man has been ordered to demolish a shower he installed in his apartment in Berlin after officials ruled it would drive up rent prices in his neighbourhood. The German media does this quite often, you know. It gives you the name and the first initial of the person in a story. Casper I, 43, assumed he would have no problems installing the shower in his apartment in the district of Kreuzberg, where he has lived for a decade. But the city authorities told him to remove the shower because it would change the nature of his neighbourhood, the character of his neighbourhood. What on earth did he install? There's not a lot of detail here, but how on earth can well, there you go, there's a question for the ages. How can a shower change the character of a neighbourhood? 90 minutes after 12, that's not the question I'm asking this hour. This hour, I'm asking, what did you faint at the sight of? Dave's in Felixstowe. Dave, what have you got?
Oh, yeah, first-time caller. The thing that I fainted at the sight of was my firstborn, my newborn son. He's 55 today.
Good Lord. Well, that's why they've put you on, because you've got a little birthday element to it. And did you, I mean, you were there when he came out, were you?
Yes.
That's quite rare 55 years ago, Dave. You were woke before it was a thing.
I was determined to be there and to support my wife through this. And as he came out, I fainted. Two nurses grabbed me. I did not hit the floor.
Because they were expecting it? Does this happen quite often, do you think?
In those days, I think they were. As you say, we weren't allowed in very much, and when I said that I'd be there, they was, oh, are you sure? Are you sure?
And they were so they're on they're on guard. They're thinking, we've got another one here. We've got another one here. Get the braces right. And they caught you before you hit the ground. Are you a big lad? Were you a big lad, Dave?
I'm 6'2", and I was about 15 stone. A rugby player, quite a good rugby player. And,
so if you had hit the floor, you might have hurt yourself. Did you? When did you come round in a chair?
They sort of got me outside, and put me on the bench that was outside the delivery room.
Newborn baby. That's a lovely story, isn't it? I'd say 20 minutes after 12. And of course, you know what is particularly unfair about this story is that entirely unintentionally, while you were trying to be a new man before a new man was even a thing to be, you somehow managed to attend the birth of your child and make it all about yourself, Dave. You made it all about your poor old wife stuck in the bed in the business of birthing your boy, and everyone's focusing on Dave. I'm teasing. Damien is in Woven Green in Buckinghamshire. Damien, what happened?
Hi, James. I'll keep it brief.
You don't have to keep it brief. Why do people say that? Do they listen to this show? I never keep it brief.
I've spoken to you before, so I'll leave space for newbies to call in.
Good man. Go on.
It's my cousin's fiancée, so it's not first-hand, but I come from a Scottish Catholic family.
Yeah.
And when they were getting or preparing for their marriage, in a Catholic church, they had to do, marriage preparation course with the priest, and obviously the priest, assumed that everyone there was pure and hadn't yet experienced the carnal.
15 years ago?
Yeah.
Oh, bless him. Sweet summer child.
And so when they explained what, a couple would be allowed, therefore, to get up to once they tied the knot, and they brought out a scientific diagram of the female anatomy, and my cousin's fiancée just turned white and fell over and had to be taken out of the course. So, yeah.
Are they still together?
They are still together, yeah, very happily married.
Any children?
Yes, they do.
Oh, thank the Lord.
Yeah, he's...
I mean, it was what, like a rush of blood to the head? Or?
Yeah, I think it was probably more...
Embarrassment?
Embarrassment,
yeah,
I think.
That's what I thought. So, good Lord.
Yeah.
Good Lord. I mean, if that story was 50 years old, it would be a bit more...
No, they still do those courses, which is... Yeah,
I'm trying to remember. I got married in a Catholic church. I'm pretty sure the priest didn't show me any pictures.
Yeah, we didn't get any pictures or sex ed, but I do remember doing a...
And it was like a diagram. It was a scientific diagram. It wasn't pictures. It wasn't the joy of sex or anything like that.
It was from a biology textbook or something.
Sensational. Thank you, Damien. God bless you. It's 23 minutes after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I want to move... Well, that's a pretty good... It doesn't need to be in a medical context. I suppose technically that last one wasn't. But what's got the least likely thing? Who's got the least likely thing to make you faint? To actually be like something out of a comic. It's and then boom, down. Rihanna is in Brentford. Rihanna, what would you like to say?
Hi, I think mine's a bit more like that. It was 50-odd years ago. I walked into a shop where the people who kept it were my friends.
Yes.
And one of the guys offered me a paper bag.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought he was going to offer me a sweet or something. He opened the bag in front of me, and it was a heaving mass of live maggots, and I passed clean out.
I love that. I mean, what I love about it is that is exactly something that could have happened in the Beano.
Yes.
It probably did, in fact. It might even be where he got the idea. And he knew it was full of maggots. He was playing a trick on you.
Yeah. Oh, he felt terrible because I went out like a, boom.
Yeah, and you could have hurt yourself. That's what I like about this story, is that he'd be there thinking he was like Roger the Dodger, and then suddenly he's going, oh, my God, she's gone over, and you went down like a tree.
I did, yeah.
Do you remember coming round? I know it was a long time ago.
Came round on the floor and was fine, but...
I love it. Thank you very much. It was maggots that nearly did me. Just a slight weariness. I know people are having their lunch, but I did warn you that this was going to happen. When I was a kid and we lived on a farm, the cats would bring rats from the barns quite often. We had quite a lot of cats. It wasn't our farm. The farmer farmed it, and we lived in the old farmhouse bit. And my job would be to get the rats from the courtyard and go and chuck them in a bin somewhere. And I postponed it. I think Mum came back from work the day after I'd been told to do it, and she said, "You know where this is going, right?" So I got the shovel and get under the rat, flip the rat over, and had an experience not unlike Rihanna's. And I just did probably the only time in my life I've ever thought, "Whoa, that's a little bit weird." Joshua is in Hexham. Joshua, what have you got?
Hi there. So my lovely wife, when I was younger and as a teenager, she gave me a commitment ring. Well, I gave her a commitment ring.
That's nice.
And I know, I thought it was really nice as well. And she loved it. She really, really enjoyed it. Then we went on the bus. We had a little Barney on the bus.
Oh.
And she got a bit overwhelmed and fainted. And then when she came back round from fainting, she didn't remember that I'd given her the ring and the commitment ring. So she came round and I got to give her the ring again. And it was really lovely.
So what did she faint at?
I think she just got, she's autistic, she gets overwhelmed quite easily, and she just...
with emotion? She fainted with... She didn't faint at the sight of the ring or anything that was on the bus. She just got very... And she fainted with emotion at the commitment ring.
Yeah.
And then you gave it to her again?
Yeah, I gave it to her again, and I got to see all this really lovely emotion again.
That's like this.
Even though that we kind of just... And the fact is, she didn't know that we kind of had a Barney before I'd...
And you're still together now?
Oh, we're still together now, yeah. We're 16 years married.
That's nice. Has she still got the ring?
No, I don't think she does, actually. She's got a new one, though, when we got married.
That's all right, then. I mean, it's on the list. I don't know. I mean, it's not really a kind of... Here is a thing that I am looking at, and here I go, going straight over. I want something like the meat thing, really. No, I mean, Joshua, I'm sounding ungrateful, mate. That's a lovely story, but just in terms of the Labour minister accused, I think unfairly, of wandering into a room full of meat, being shown some large chunks of beef and some steaks, and then feeling faint. It's not actually what happened. Spoiler alert. He was in the middle of a heat wave and he was coming in and out of cold storage units. I think we'd all probably feel a little bit of lightheaded, but that's what that's the gold standard. Dan's in Southfields. Dan, what have you got?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
I can't believe I'm confessing this to you. You draw it out of me, but I fell asleep. I fainted in my antenatal classes. I was sitting there in St Thomas's, top floor of St Thomas's, and I actually started to see... You don't always go the way you describe it, actually. The way I went was I started to see sort of stars in my eyes, and my wife said to me, "Don't you dare."
Did she really?
Yeah.
That's nice.
She said, "Don't you dare." And so I thought, right, I'll make an exit. Woke up in the corridor, sat on the ground, so I must have got myself down on the ground and not keeled over, surrounded by a couple of nurses who were very caring and saying, "You okay? We'll get you a hot chocolate." Did all of that, and then I sort of came round and they said, "So, what birthing unit did you come out of?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I haven't. I've just come out of the antenatal classes." She almost snatched the hot chocolate off me.
You big girl's blouse. Get back in there. Get back in there this minute. Which bit was it that sent you over the edge?
It was the stuff about... Well, I'm not squeamish. This is the thing. I was fine.
Of course you're not, mate. Yeah, whatever.
Well, I was in the delivery and that was all fine.
Oh,
that was
right.
all fine. So it was about epidurals, and it was about 3:00 in the afternoon. I hadn't eaten. I'm sounding like I'm making a lot of excuses.
No,
here.
you're not, and you're not. But it was so that's the injection into the. I mean,
the spine. Yeah,
that was the bit that made you go.
Yeah. That was it. But yeah, mortally embarrassing, and too late to change my name, I guess, is it?
Well, I was thinking more about your wife knowing you so well that she kind of thought he's going. Don't you dare. And then, boom, you've gone. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've actually got some proper grown-up journalism to do, sadly. Before 1:00 today, we are addressing Catherine's complaint. Before 1:00 with Natasha Clark. I don't know how much attention you've been paying to the programme today. I'm not going to explain it again. But we will be addressing Catherine's complaint with Natasha from 12:45. And after the news, we will be catching up with Mikey Smith of the Daily Mirror, because it suddenly occurred to me when I was reading coverage of Donald Trump's ongoing legal battles with the BBC that most of the British media are on Donald Trump's side. At least they certainly were when it started. Same with the war as well, of course, in Iran, that most of the British media felt that Keir Starmer should have been getting stuck right into. They've all gone a bit quiet now. So we're going to actually come at it from either the BBC side or possibly a more objective position altogether. We'll be doing that after the very latest headlines with Matt Hewitt.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33 is the time. I always feel bad saying things like this because it makes me sound ungrateful, or as if I'm critiquing my gorgeous contributors. So far, what have you fainted at the sight of is not going as well as our silly season story yesterday, which was, have you ever been attacked by a wild animal? So, listen, there's still time. That's why I'm telling you. Think of it not as a criticism, but as an encouragement. So if you've got a story, the thing that made you faint, that you think might be better than the bloke what got attacked by a lion from yesterday, then 0345 606 0973 is the number you need. Mikey Smith at the Daily Mirror is far too serious a journalist to be engaging in answers to either of those questions, and he has, because somebody has to, and not that many people are properly following the ongoing legal action against the BBC being brought by Donald Trump. Before we get on to the latest developments, Mikey, thank you for joining us. But the element that some people may not be aware of is the evidence that's emerged of just how many people in America might have watched the allegedly offending episode of Panorama that prompted this legal action in the first place.
James, I think this is a fascinating story, and I've been watching it the whole time through because I think it's a great look at how Donald Trump treats lawsuits and how he uses sort of process as punishment rather than ever intending them to see a courtroom. In this particular case, the really funny bit is, obviously this goes back to the Panorama programme where the BBC have admitted they spliced a few sentences together, although they haven't admitted that it changed the meaning of what he said. You know, he did call for people to go to the Capitol building and try and stop the lawful handover of power, the lawful certification of Joe Biden beating Donald Trump. But there's an old saying in courtrooms: you're never supposed to ask a question that you don't already know the answer to. And Donald Trump kind of found out why, because when it came to depositions, they sat down one of the senior BBC digital distribution people and asked him, how many people would have seen this episode of Panorama, and presumably got out a spreadsheet and said 285. and I imagine there was a back and forth where 285,000? No. No, 285 people. And of those, about roughly 34, I believe, were in Florida where the case is being brought. And most of those people, where the IP addresses traced back to Florida, were actually in Slough, because they belong to they belong to a cruise line which is registered in Florida but based in Slough. So
I've got absolutely nothing to say in response to that final nugget of information. But this is pertinent. I mean, simultaneously hilarious, but it's relevant because they need to try to prove some form of reputational damage or even electoral damage, in which case it would need to have been watched by enough people to, for example, sway a vote.
Yes. And this, when it was originally brought, they were actually looking for financial damages as well. They said it would have cost him financially, and the BBC's lawyers immediately said, well, show us your bank statements, basically. Prove it. And in Discovery they were supposed to be handing over financial statements of hundreds of Trump's companies and his family, and the Trump legal team very rapidly went to the judge and said, can we just change this lawsuit a little bit? And the judge sort of let him off the hook with that. So he's not seeking to prove that he was financially damaged, but he's seeking to prove in the revised lawsuit, it calls it a brazen attempt to influence the 2024 election. The problem with that is that the other problem with that is that 285 figure is for the entire year that Panorama programme was available on iPlayer, and it went out a week before the election. So I'm willing to estimate that as near to zero as makes no difference, people in America watched it.
I don't know what your online team is like, Mikey, but ours is obsessed with completion rates. They're always saying it doesn't matter how many how many hits you've had. That what we're really interested in is how many people watched it all the way to the end. Do we have any data on completion rates here?
Sadly, I don't. I think that would be less of a problem because I think this vignette that they put together, the someone would say slightly imperfect edit was right at the beginning of the programme anyway. It was in the introduction.
So they don't need necessarily to worry about that. So they've dropped the idea of financial damage because, well, either because there wasn't any or because they'd have to reveal their financial dealings, many of which are of great interest to many people, including journalists, or because it's a combination of both. Does that mean that is that a separate story from the serving of subpoenas on Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner? Because he was bleating about that last week.
Yeah, I think that's a newer development. The changing of the lawsuit was a couple of weeks ago. This is, I think, serving of subpoenas for the new lawsuit. So the BBC is trying to depose Don Jr., Ivanka, the various people who were around and in contact with Donald Trump in sort of the hours leading up to the January 6th speech, not unreasonably, because they would have been the people who knew his frame of mind. They were their communications with him would have been illustrative.
Witnesses.
Of that.
They're subpoenaing witnesses.
Imagine.
Yes.
But no, I read this morning that they're using the Secret Service to try and prevent being physically served with papers.
Really? So if a clerk of the court turns up, or I mean, I forget who they use in America. Perhaps they use Dog the Bounty Hunter. Turns up with a document that they need to physically serve, they're going to get intercepted by the Secret Service.
But it seems so. This is what's been reported overnight. I haven't looked into it in a great deal of detail. I imagine there is a way around that sooner or later. But yeah, in America, you have to physically give someone a piece of paper to subpoena them. And
this is why Trump has been whining about his family being harassed by the BBC.
Yes,
as he seeks a $10 billion lawsuit over a programme that 285 people max watched. Less, because the ones in Slough don't count.
The thing that's really, I think, fascinating about this is Donald Trump sues a lot of people.
Yes.
And his lawsuits very rarely end up in a courtroom. It's vanishingly rare because most people settle out of court. He sues them for these eye-watering figures. He did it with ABC News. He's doing it with the New York Times now, Wall Street Journal, all sorts of media outlets. He's sued for these massive figures, and a lot of them will just settle out of court because it makes it go away, and they know they have business to get done while this president is in office. So it's safer from their point of view to just make it go away. The BBC is not allowed to settle out of court.
I didn't know that.
The BBC, under the Royal Charter, I didn't learn this until yesterday. The BBC, under the Royal Charter, is not permitted to accept an out-of-court settlement. So the only way that this ends for Donald Trump is either by him backing down or a judge ruling in court. And that is just baffling to him.
Yeah, and unlikely that he understood that before he started. The other element, of course, and I know you know this, but for the benefit of people listening, that there's also an argument that he seeks to control or suppress journalism. So if you're worried about a $10 billion lawsuit, you are less likely to speak truth to power, even, or report things that they may find unpleasant. Although the BBC, I suspect, have taken him by surprise by coming out very much on the fists up.
Yeah, I mean, they surprised me quite a lot, and I didn't realise that a lot of it is because of this rule that under the Royal Charter they're not allowed to settle.
Which brings us to the judge that you just mentioned, and there was a Trump-nominated judge in place, and now he's been replaced by another Trump-nominated judge.
A more recently nominated judge, I think, is the key part.
Term two. Is it a term two judge versus a term one judge?
I believe so, about 15 months ago. Okay. I need to double check that, but if not term two, then more recently than the previous judge. And as I understand it, a lot of cases have found themselves moved to this judge in Florida. Florida is Trump's favourite place to sue people. It's his, sort of pseudo home state. He lives there, but also. It's outside of London, it's a pretty good place to sue people. And I imagine if he's going to have to take it to court or back down, what he doesn't want to do is to have the judge sort of dismiss it before it reaches a courtroom. And I imagine the change to this new judge is because he doesn't want to have it sort of dismissed.
And that, I mean, the BBC have asked for that, haven't they? They had asked for the case to be dismissed, presumably on the grounds that we've been discussing with regards to meeting the legal criteria for defamation. And forgive me if you don't know this, but can he just do that? Can he just say, I don't like the look of that, Judge, can we have this one? Or does it have to go through his cronies and his... Or it could be an entirely coincidental replacement of one Trump-appointed judge with another, even more sympathetic Trump-appointed judge.
Entirely possible. But, I mean, let's not forget this is a guy who, while he was in charge of the Justice Department, sued the IRS, who he was in charge of. So, you know, he's perfectly happy using the levers he has within the parts of the government that he controls to his own benefit. And I imagine he would get away with that. Have you got a favourite bit yet of the whole story? Because I have. The deposition, the 285. I think that's your favourite. I'll see you that, and I'll raise you his own legal team saying that they couldn't disclose his financial records because it would cause him irreparable harm. I believe he said something similar in a previous court case because there was a court case in New York where he was trying to cover up evidence that he had misstated his net worth. Right, and I believe he used a similar argument there. I can't tell you this. You can't see the details because it would cause me, the victim in this case, irreparable harm. Mikey, thank you. That's a cracking job. I also, just a quick word for people who are seeing you in vision. That's a lovely shed you've got there, mate. This is my kitchen. Oh, Lord, how embarrassing. Hence the fire blanket. This is my lovely tiny kitchen. It's the brickwork. It's lovely. It is 12:45. Mikey Smith of The Mirror there, the US political editor, doing an absolutely cracking job of bringing you up to speed with all the difficult details of yet another example of Donald Trump's abject, ridiculous... Oh, it's a curious mixture, isn't it, of absurdity and obscenity. And here we are again. It's 12:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's a challenge. Natasha Clark is here to...
No, not a challenge.
No, not for you. Don't worry. This is what are we doing? Countering Catherine's complaint. Didn't I come up... Wasn't there an alliteration there? What was it? Countering Catherine's complaint? Or some such? Anyway, that's why you're here. I don't know if you're aware of that. I'll read you. I'll read you the complaint in a moment. It's a complaint I never thought I would receive. Okay. In all my years of broadcasting, most people, when I told them that, said, "Has someone complained that you don't talk enough?"
That you don't talk enough,
yes,
or that I don't talk enough?
That would be the most unlikely complaint that I could ever receive.
Is 3 hours enough? But 3 hours a day not enough for these people?
This is an even rarer complaint. And then hopefully we'll have time for what might be my favourite fainting story of the day, but it depends. We might not have time for it. And that's the kind of tension that keeps you tuned in. So, earlier today, Catherine in Northumberland wrote, "Why isn't James O'Brien talking about Farage and reform? Has there been an injunction? Because normally James O'Brien would have done a whole show on the reform PIP changes and the infighting with top members and the suspension of Tim Montgomery. He would normally relish these topics. It seems he'll talk about anything but Farage and reform these days." I get about 100 complaints a day from people who say that I talk about it too much, which obviously I don't. But that is the first and quite possibly the last complaint I will ever receive about not talking enough about the shenanigans and the question marks and the absurdity and the appalling conduct of members of said party.
And we've got the answer, haven't we? We know you know the answer to why you haven't done.
There's been quite a lot going on.
Well, I would just say that it's because Henry Riley's on drive this week.
Well, also Henry Riley is on drive, but the main reason is because I've explained earlier, I struggle to walk the tightrope between treating policies that fall apart on scrutiny with scrutiny. But that's not actually why you're here. You're addressing Catherine's point about the infighting first.
Yeah, that's right. And there has been a lot of infighting behind the scenes. As far as I can read and tell it, Reform will insist that that's not the case. But it absolutely, according to the least of people that I'm speaking to, it seems to be. The Reform Party, as you know, James, have probably not had a fantastic summer. The scrutiny over Nigel Farage has become more intense in recent months, including over those donations, those gifts, whether they were properly declared. Back in June, I think it was fair to say that the scale of his irritation over these questions became clear in this interview with LBC.
with all due respect, what's it got to do with you?
Well, because it speaks to the position of you hold in office. Initially, we were told that it was because of your personal security and it would pay for that for the rest of your life. Then apparently it was some kind of reward for campaigning for Brexit. I am told we have two different stories. Which is the truth?
Well, I think you're contradicting yourself there, aren't you?
Well, if you tell me what happened with the £5 million, then we're solved.
It's an unconditional gift. I can spend it on Ferraris if I want. That'd be entirely up to me.
Why did you say it was for personal security then?
Because it was given as an unconditional gift, right? The understanding is, and you know very well, I've been physically more attacked over many years than any other
I've been with you when you've been abused. I've seen that. But my listeners want to know, Mr. Farrar, how much has been spent?
Nick, I can do with it as I want. I can do what I want with it. I can put it on the horses.
What did you do at school? Because we would go, at that point, ooh, smell the cheese. Did you do smell the cheese?
No,
what did you do? Did you do anything?
No, I don't.
Just an ooh?
Yeah, just an ooh.
No,
I can't think
ooh, smell
what
the
does that
cheese.
mean?
I've no idea why we did it,
I've
but
missed
on
the
we go.
here.
But
yes, you could tell that he was starting to get upset by some of those questions, and it was on other broadcasters as well, that he really showed that he was getting a bit rattled by all of this. He then called, of course, the Clacton by-election, which he, of course, won, but he was embarrassed, and he did admit in an interview with a newspaper that he did not expect all of the other political parties to pull out, resulting in him having to fight no one other than a bin.
It's a little unfair on the 32 other novels.
Sorry, none other than a bin. A bin plus other 15 candidates or so. And the party have also had a bit of a dip in the polls. Labour have had a bit of a burn and bounce. The Tories have had a little bit of a gains. Reform have been trying to get on the on the front foot with a string of announcements in the last few weeks to try to grab back the attention of voters and the media. They talked about sending in the Navy to tackle small boats, the banning foreign citizens from claiming welfare, and promising to expand prison capacity and keep more people behind bars. But last week, this really exploded into quite a public row on social media. The former Defence Secretary and former Prisons Minister Ben Wallace put on social media a series of questions on this prisons announcement and how they would do that. Zia Youssef, who is the party's Home Affairs spokesman, tweeted back to say, "It was incredible that this moron is Defence Secretary. Our policy is in direct response to your failures." He also called him a traitor. LBC also spoke with Sir Ben Wallace after those remarks.
Good morning. Well, Nick, I don't care about being called a moron. I do care about being called a traitor, which you missed out from his quote. He called me a traitor.
Yes, he did.
He called lots of people traitors. And traitor is a very loaded charge. Traitor carries, by history, a death sentence. And this is a man who, a few weeks ago, was telling people to modify their language after the tragic murder of Anne Widdecombe, and spouts this stuff. I also think it's a bit cheeky. This is a guy who's an American banker, for God's sake. Never put a uniform on in his life. I spent 9 years of my life on operational tours and in uniform.
Just for the record, I don't mind being called a moron either. If you don't understand that reference, hopefully you will before the end of the programme. Wallace, of course, a former military officer.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what Zia Youssef's background is. Looking at him, I presume he was either a supply teacher or a banker.
He definitely worked in finance, as far as I'm aware. But yes, that really caused a total spat from within the Reform Party. Nigel Farage publicly then distanced himself from those remarks. He said this was a bit over the top. He stated he would give Zia Youssef a ticking off. But despite that, the social media post remained up. But that really sparked, I think, James, some discussion within the party. Lots of people think that just went too far. At a press conference earlier this week, Richard Tice earlier laughed off suggestions of a rift in the party.
Do you think Nigel Farage or others within Reform are running out of patience with your Home Affairs spokesperson, Zia Youssef?
Honestly, no is the answer. Zia's doing a brilliant job. He gave a fantastic press conference last week. And, I mean, I know it's August and people are a bit short of stories, but it's best not to make things up.
Very good.
And the person who is today in the firing line is a man called Tim Montgomery. He used to run the Conservative Home website. He defected to the Reform Party. He's now been suspended as a member by the Reform Party for seemingly a lot of criticism of the party, including last week.
You must have got this wrong, because they're the party of free speech.
I have heard that too, but apparently not so for the man who apparently was, until recently, working with them to do a spin-off of Conservative Home, essentially Reform Home, a website where they could discuss ideas,
which is what he does. I mean,
which is what he does. He's a commentator.
Yeah, and previously a speechwriter, I think, for Dunkin' Donuts or William Hague, or possibly both of them. And then in one of those think tanks that we learned so much about. And then as you say, set up a website. And some people in that era, 2005, were setting up websites because they couldn't get proper jobs in journalism. I've no idea whether that applies to him. Then he had a little go at the Times, I think, as comment editor, and not for long. So if this was a left-wing figure, we would not know his name. He would be a cipher. He would be a punctuation mark upon the history of the political party that he was working for. But I opened the Daily Telegraph today, and it's the page lead on page 4.
Are you saying slightly over-egged?
Just a little bit.
Maybe.
Yes. And also, what a pompous man, the way he speaks about, I'm going to stay in the party, and I'm this, that, and the other. Who is he?
Yeah, like you say, we've sort of just outlined his sort of vague background. Many people, though, on the right saw his defection to the Conservative Party as a real shift of the idea that the Conservative Party, as we knew it, might be dead. Yeah.
So it's someone who bestows a veneer of respectability because he used to be involved in a proper political party.
Exactly. So him, people like Jake Berry, people like sort of those people that were in Danny Kruger as well, big parts of the Conservative Party that then defected over to Reform.
So what they're saying is,
who they are, what they represent.
We might have 30p Lee on the roster and Richard Tice, but look, we've also got these guys, and they sound as if they went to school.
Exactly, they're credible figures according to some in the right who make the party, they say, more credible. But Zia Youssef is on the other side of that bandwagon. He says, and he actually put a message on social media today saying, isn't it funny that these people who all have the words right honourable in their title are some of the least honourable people in society? So a clear hit at those people who are those former Tories, former people that were at the top levels of government. And it does seem like Tim Montgomery is very much like the sort of wedge of this. He's been now suspended. He did this interview with The Spectator this week where he said that Zia Youssef is not a team player.
There are a lot of people who are on no speaking terms with Zia, and it's nearly always Zia who initiates this. It needs to end. You cannot behave like a child in politics. You cannot have litmus tests, on so many litmus tests where you stop talking to people. And I genuinely pay tribute to what Zia, like I've mentioned, how brilliant he was on the vetting thing. He made the party organisation work. He has so many qualities, but he has to be a team player.
A team player. Well, on we go. Thank you very much. Shall I just reveal why I thought it was important to stress? Did you hear Ben Wallace saying he doesn't mind being called a moron?
Yes, I don't mind being called a moron.
No, well, just for the record, I don't mind being called a moron either.
That was that moron, O'Brien, that comes on this channel after you.
That's it for today.
I get called a lot worse than a moron.
Yeah, well, not necessarily on my show, though.
Never by you, no. But on my show. or the sort of shadow online version of it that happens while I'm on air.
Exactly that. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can also stay up to date with all the latest news, videos and opinion. You can listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, best bits from my LBC show every day. We had some technical problems yesterday. If you didn't get the catch-up of the programme, I can only apologise, but it should all be fine today, not wanting to jinx anything. So download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Is Tom Swarbrick with you at 4?
Yes.
Okay. Sheila Fogarty is with you now.
Did you hear that? Definite yes. I thought
Natasha just said Henry was doing drive.
He meant his...
Well,
yeah.
Okay. Anyway, we should have these chats off there, guys.
This completely wrong. Live rota discussion on LBC.
Can I have Friday off?
James O'Brien on LBC.